Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really difficult subject, the assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk at Utah Valley University. Specifically, we're looking at the immediate aftermath, the commentary, the analysis that just exploded online and across media.
Yeah, and we've got a huge amount of source material here. Commentary, reports, ideological takes. It's all incredibly polarized, very raw. Our job is to try and make sense of it.
Exactly. We're not taking sides here. Our mission, for you the listener, is to map out the facts as reported, the crime itself, the suspect, and then really dig into the reaction, the political fallout, the conspiracy theories, the narratives that solidified almost instantly.
It's about understanding how an event like this gets processed or maybe weaponized across the spectrum. The sources really lay bare those deep divisions.
So let's start with the incident itself, part one. Crime, the suspect, and the captain.
Right, and before we even get into the politics, the human tragedy is just immense. Charlie Kirk, 31 years old, shot while...
And the detail that hits hardest, reported consistently, is that his wife and two very young children, ages 3 and 1, were right there. They witnessed.
It's horrific, unimaginable. And that fact really colors everything that follows, doesn't it? The intensity of the reaction.
Absolutely. And the way it happened, sources are clear. This wasn't random. A single shot, high-powered rifle from a rooftop about 200 yards away.
Yeah, described as a planned, coordinated assassination, not a mass shooting scenario. This took skill, planning.
It speaks to a very focused intent. And the irony, which many commentators pointed out immediately, was the topic Kirk was discussing right before he was shot.
Gun violence, and specifically mentioning transgender individuals in relation to shooting, and his last reported word was violence.
Just chilling. His supporters obviously seized on that as a terrible confirmation of the dangers he was highlighting.
Okay, so how did they find the person responsible? The suspect identified was 22-year-old Tyler Robinson,
A former pre-engineering student at Utah State University. The arrest happened pretty quickly, relatively speaking.
about 33 hours later, yeah. And maybe 3 hours south of the university, down in Washington County, Utah.
What led them there? The sources point to key evidence.
Two main things initially. First, his car, a gray Dodge Challenger, was caught on UVU surveillance camera. Pretty distinctive.
And second, the weapon itself. A long-range rifle, a Mauser .3006 bolt action, I believe.
That's the one. It was found not too far from the campus, wrapped in a towel, ditched in a wooded area.
Which, as commentators noted, seems like a planned move.
Right, a classic escape tactic. Get rid of the main piece of evidence quickly, separate yourself from it. It suggests premeditation, doesn't it? Cold calculation.
It does. But the way they actually zeroed in on him, on Robinson, that's a story in itself.
It really is. The sources emphasize this point. It was Tyler Robinson's own family who recognized him from the surveillance photos released to the public.
Wow. That's incredibly different.
Absolutely. But they contacted law enforcement and apparently urged him to turn himself in. Authorities publicly praised them for it.
It speaks volumes about that community, perhaps. But before Robinson was identified, there was that initial chaos, right? The wrong person being targeted.
Oh, yeah. A huge mess. An older man, 77 years old, Canadian, Michael Mallinson. He was initially detained as a person of interest.
And then released. Cleared completely.
Yeah.
But the damage was done online.
Instantly. His picture, his name, details about his pro-Democrat social media plastered everywhere by unreliable sources, these sort of fake news accounts.
So this innocent man is suddenly facing online hate threats.
Yeah.
Because people needed a suspect now.
Exactly. It's a really stark example of how fast misinformation spreads in these situations and the real harm it causes. It distracts from the actual investigation.
Okay, so let's move into part 2. We know who the suspect is, how he was caught. Now the focus shifts to why, unpacking Tyler Robinson's alleged ideology and radicalization.
Right. And his background, as described by family in the source, is really striking. Raised in Washington, Utah, in what's called a conservative Mormon household.
And academically gifted, too. A 4.0 student, a 34 on the ACT, which, as the sources point out, is like Harvard-level average.
Yeah, very smart. But he dropped out of Utah State University after less than a semester. Something clearly changed.
And his family reported that change involved politics. His views had hardened toward the left in recent years. That's the term.
Hardened, yeah. And Robinson himself apparently wasn't cooperating much with officials initially, but he had expressed specific views about Charlie Kirk.
What did he say?
He reportedly told people Kirk was full of hate and significantly spreading.
And commentators picked up on that phrasing.
Immediately. They called spreading hate a specifically very left-wing adjective, part of the lexicon used to categorize and dismiss opponents on the right. It suggests he'd adopted a particular ideological framework.
In the context of his life around that time, the sources mention his living.
Yes, he was reportedly in a romantic relationship roommate who is transgender, and this roommate seems to have cooperated fully with the investigation.
Handing over messages.
Messages that apparently discuss Robinson retrieving and hiding the rifle. So, pointing towards premeditation, even if the roommate himself was reportedly shocked and horrified when the assassination actually happened.
So where did this alleged radicalization come from? The sources point finger.
Pretty directly at online culture. Deep, dark internet Reddit culture is one phrase. Also, specific anti-fascist discourse.
So the typical modern pathway. High intelligence meeting anonymous online echo.
That seems to be the narrative presented in these sources, where complex ideas can merge, aggressive troll meme culture.
Which brings us to probably the most bizarre and analyzed piece of physical evidence, the inscriptions found on the ammunition case.
Yeah, this is really where the digital world seems to crash. There was the one casing from the fatal shot and 3 unfired rounds recovered.
Let's break them down. The fired casing.
It read, "Notices bulges own what's this?" which is apparently a well-known copy pasta. A block of text copied and pasted online, often ironically. This one specifically parodies furry and online role-playing sub.
Okay, so pure internet meme. Very niche. What about the unfired?
They shift dramatically. One was very direct, "Hey fascists" catch. A clear political threat.
Right. And another referenced history.
Yeah. Oh, Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao, Ciao, Ciao. That's from Bella Ciao, the Italian anti-Nazi partisan song from World War II. It's become a global anti-fascist anthem.
So that seems like unambiguous, serious political intent, referencing anti-fascist resistance.
It does, but then there's a third unfired.
What did that one say?
If you read this, you are...
Seriously. So back to juvenile internet trolling.
Exactly, like a schoolyard taunt, which creates this huge interpretive problem. Right?
Yeah, how do you square that? You've got what looks like serious leftist anti-fascist messaging next to a furry meme reference and a playground insult.
The sources really wrestled. Was it intentional misdirection, an attempt to troll investigator? Or does it actually reflect the sort of chaotic blend of genuine political anger and nihilistic internet irony that characterizes some online radicalization?
A mix of real ideology and just noise.
Possibly. But despite that ambiguity, the political leadership in Utah didn't seem too hesitant. Governor Spencer Cox's statement is quoted repeatedly.
What did he say?
He stated quite clearly that there clearly was a leftist ideology with this assassin.
And that statement really anchored the narrative for conservative commentators, didn't it?
Absolutely. It framed the act not as random or as trolling gone wrong, but as the direct result of Robinson's reported ideological journey away from his conservative roots and into these far-left online spaces. The Bella Ciao reference, "Hey fascists" message, those ultimately carried more weight in that interpretation.
Okay, so that sets the stage for part 3, the political fallout. The immediate reaction. And according to the sources, it was intense.
Intense is an understatement. Commentators across the board, even those usually quite cynical, describe the reaction from parts of the left as reaching a new level of hostility. The sources documented widespread, truly shocking and brazen dehumanized glee online immediately following Kirk's confirmed death.
Glee. Actual celebration.
Yeah, not just fringe elements. The sources cite numerous examples from social media, posts saying "rest in piss," "smoking on Charlie Kirk," "ding dong, the witch is dead," even things like "God's timing is always right," implying divine approval.
That's disturbing.
Yeah.
Were specific individuals or groups mentioned?
Yes. The sources name examples to show how mainstream some of this felt. A transgender individual reportedly made a diss song about Kirk's death. A dentist, apparently quite prominent, faced a huge public backlash, celebratory comments.
Even companies got involved.
There's an incident reported with Bethesda, the gaming company. They apparently posted something mocking the assassination, calling Kirk a fascist internally, and then had to quickly delete it after public outcry. It suggests a normalization of that kind of extreme rhetoric, even in professional settings.
And the backlash wasn't just online trolling. There were consequences in established institutions.
The most high-profile case was probably the MS Matthew Dow. He was fired almost immediately.
Why? What did she say?
On air, he suggested Kirk basically brought it on himself because of his hate speech, and he went further, speculating that maybe the shooter wasn't even leftist. Maybe it was a right-wing supporter trying to create a martyr.
That kind of speculation flying in the face of the emerging evidence about Rob, how is that interpreted?
Well, many right-leaning sources framed it as a predictable attempt by mainstream media to immediately deflect blame, to avoid acknowledging the leftist ideology potentially driving the violence because that narrative was politically inconvenient. And this idea of blaming Kirk's own rhetoric, was that a common theme? According to these sources, yes, it was widespread in certain circles on the left. Some immediately floated the idea the killer must be right-wing, or that Kirk's own language, which they described as demagogic fascist, was the real cause. It's essentially arguing that his speech justified a violent response.
And this alleged institutional rot, it wasn't just media. There was something about a school teacher.
Yeah, a really disturbing story reported in the sources. A public school teacher was allegedly suspended, put on leave, because she reportedly forced her fifth-grade class to watch the video of the assassination.
Fifth graders?
Yeah. Forced them to watch it on repeat, allegedly, and told them Kirk deserved it. She apparently framed it as a justifiable act of anti-fascism linked to transit.
Using a murder as a lesson in anti-fascism for 10-year-olds? That's shocking.
It shocked commentators across the spectrum, understandably. And then there was an incident reported from the U.S. House floor.
What happened there?
When a Republican representative called for a moment of silence or prayer for Charlie Kirk, some Democrats on the floor allegedly shouted, "No."
Wow. Whether that was planned or spontaneous, the sources definitely used it.
They cited it as evidence of a breakdown in basic decorum, a refusal to offer even standard condolences to a political opponent who had just been murdered, a sign of extreme dehumanization.
So that's the reaction reported from parts of the left. How did the right frame this?
The framing on the right was immediate, unified, and This was an act of left-wing terrorism.
Terrorism? That's a strong word.
Very strong. The argument was that the assassination wasn't just about killing Kirk, it was about intimidating everyone else, silencing conservative speech, particularly on college campuses where Kirk was active.
And the analysis didn't stop there, did it? They brought in historical parallels.
They did, and this is where the argument gets much broader. Commentators drew direct lines between this assassination and what they described as a long pattern of Democrat Party violent resistance to federal authority throughout American history.
Which historical events specifically?
They cited things like the resistance to Reconstruction after the Civil War, the defiance of federal school integration orders in places like Little Rock in 97 and Ole Miss in 92, and Governor George Wallace famously blocking the schoolhouse door in Alabama in 93.
So the argument is?
The argument presented is that historically, when the Democrat establishment felt threatened, they resorted to or tolerated violence and defiance, and it always required federal intervention, often troops, to stop what they called Democrat tyranny and violence.
So framing Kirk's assassination is the latest example in that historical pattern, elevating it beyond just one tragic event.
Exactly. Positioning it as systemic ideological violence rooted in a specific political tradition, therefore demanding a national response, not just the local criminal investigation.
It's also worth noting, the sources mentioned this caused some fractures within the left too, right?
Yes, absolutely. There were reports of liberals expressing distress or sadness over the violence itself. One example cited was a young woman crying on video about it.
And how was that?
She was reportedly attacked fiercely by other leftists online for mourning someone they considered a fascist. Showing sympathy was seen as betrayal by some.
And that pushed some people away.
It seems so. The sources mention several individuals, self-described liberals or leftists, publicly stating they were leaving the movement because of this. They felt the reaction to Kirk's death showed a new level of hatred and an unacceptable embrace of political violence that they just couldn't stomach anymore.
So amid all this political firestorm, the conspiracy theories started swirling. Part 4.
Yeah, almost inevitable in a situation this charged, right? When the official story feels too simple or too horrifying, alternative explanations emerge.
What were the main ones reported?
One relatively minor one focused on Kirk's own security details. Some online sleuths were analyzing the footage.
What did they claim?
They suggested that a security guard who put his arm out and touched Kirk just moments before the shot might have been signaling the shooter.
Like an inside job.
That was the implication. But most observers who looked at the footage, according to the sources, dismissed this pretty quickly. They pointed out the security team looked genuinely shocked. They were diving for cover themselves, clearly in the line of fire. Their actions looked protective, not complicit.
Okay, so that one didn't gain much serious traction. What was the bigger theory?
The much more prominent and, frankly, more inflammatory theory involved Israel and Mossad, its intelligence.
Israel? Why would Israel be involved? Kirk was generally seen as very pro-Israel.
He was, described by supporters as a radical Zionist, but the theory gained traction because Kirk had recently made some very pointed criticisms, not of Israel itself, but of certain secular Jewish donors in the U.S.
What kind of criticism?
He claimed they were the #1 funding mechanism for policies he opposed. Radical opener, neoliberal, quasi-Marxist policy was the quote site. Very strong language targeting specific, powerful individuals.
And did this connect to any personal fears Kirk might have had?
There were secondhand reports mentioned in the source. Someone close to Kirk allegedly claimed he had expressed fear that if he pushed too hard against these donor networks, Israel itself might retaliate against him, maybe even kill him.
That's quite a claim. Did proponents offer any other evidence?
That the timing of official reactions was noted, specifically that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu tweeted condolences or condemnation very, very quickly, faster, some noted, than even Donald Trump.
And that speed was interpreted as suspicion, like foreknowledge.
High proponents of the theory, yeah. It fed into this narrative of hidden hand, complex plot.
So how did experts or commentators respond to the Mossad theory?
Overwhelmingly dismissed. Security analysts and commentators quoted in the sources called it absurd, stupid, and fundamentally illogical from an intelligence.
What was their reason?
The core argument is about strategic message. If a state agency like Mossad wanted to eliminate someone like Kirk to send a message either to silence him or warn others critical of certain Israeli or Jewish interests, they wouldn't frame a leftist activist.
Why not?
Because the message gets lost.
Oh.
For deterrence to work, the target audience needs to know who sent the message. Claiming responsibility, even subtly, maximize impact. Hiding it behind a false flag involving a known ideological opponent makes no strategic sense. It just muddies the waters.
So the prevailing view in the sources is that this theory is based...
Yes, largely seen as anti-Semitic opportunism, trying to use the tragedy to attack Israel or Jewish influence rather than a credible analysis of events, especially given Kirk's overall pro-Israel.
Okay, let's shift then to part 5, how conservative commentators framed Charlie Kirk's legacy in the immediate aftermath and their call to action.
Right. The descriptions of Kirk from his supporters and allied commentators were, as you'd expect, incredibly positive, almost hagiographic.
What kind of terms were used?
Titan of conservative activism, modern-day warrior, but also emphasizing his personal qualities. Gentle soul, good Christian, good family man.
And his core mission, how was that defined?
Centered entirely on dialogue and civil discourse. His whole strategy with Turning Point USA was about going into hostile territory college campuses and engaging directly with opponents.
The famous invitation to the front of the line for critics.
Exactly. Always inviting disagreement, seeking debate rather than avoiding it. That was presented as his signature approach.
And his supporters claimed this approach was working.
They pointed to polling data suggesting a real shift among 18 to 25-year-olds towards conservatism, and they attributed a significant part of that shift directly to Kirk's efforts. They believed he was genuinely changing minds through engagement.
Which creates that profound, tragic irony they kept highlighting.
The ultimate irony, yeah. The dialogue guy, the one who believed in arguing, not fighting, was killed by targeted violence precisely because of his words, and spreading them.
They framed it as confirmation of his warnings.
Confirmation, they argued, that when dialogue fails or becomes too effective for the opposition, the left's first choice is violence. That was a common refrain.
And they saw it as a failure of a specific philosophy.
Yes, a failure of the idea sometimes attributed to the left that speech is violent. By resorting to actual kinetic violence against someone for their speech, the killer, in their view, exposed the danger and hypocrisy of that stance. It showed a comfort with real violence that went beyond rhetoric.
So given this horrific event, what was the call to action from the conservatives? Was there talk of revenge?
Interestingly, no. The sources are quite clear on that. Commentators explicitly warned against retaliation in kind. They specifically cautioned against turning Kirk's assassination into a George Floyd moment for the right.
Meaning not letting it become an excuse for widespread conflict or violence.
Exactly. The focus was not on vengeance, but on something else. They called it multiplication.
Multiplication, what does that mean?
The idea was that killing Charlie Kirk wouldn't silence his message. Instead, millions of Charlie Kirks were created. The response should be to double down on his work, on his values, on the fight for conservative ideas, but non-violent.
So an ideological and cultural response, not a physical one.
Precise. The calls to action were very personal and community-focused. Things like go to church, strengthen your faith, have children, prioritize your family.
They even mentioned Kirk's personal habits.
Yes, they highlighted that he practiced a form of the Jewish Sabbath, turning off his phone from Friday night to Saturday night to focus solely on family. This was presented as part of the model to emulate personal integrity, family-focused spiritual grounding.
And politically.
Engage more. Get involved locally, nationally. Defeat the ideology that produced this violence through political action, through debate, through winning election. Honor his legacy by succeeding in the arena where he was killed, ensuring his death fueled wider mobilization, not despair or rage.
Okay, let's try to synthesize this for the outro. This deep dive shows a society really grappling with an act of extreme political violence.
Yeah, an attack driven by what the sources describe as intense ideological pull. We saw that in the killer's alleged motives, the specific language found on the ammo, that mix of anti-fascism, trans issues, and internet culture.
And the reaction was just as polarized. Shocking celebration and blame shifting on one side versus condemnation, framing it as terrorism and drawing these deep historical parallels on the other. The event was instantly weaponized.
And the key takeaways for you, the listener, are pretty sobering, aren't they? First, just how quickly and effectively online these niche Discord servers, Reddit forum, can apparently foster radicalization, even in someone's seemingly high achievement.
And second, the alarming normalization of extreme hostility towards political opponent that seemed evident in some reaction. The reported actions of that MSNBC host, the teacher, it suggests a deeper institutional issue for some commentators.
So the final thought we want to leave you with, building on all, it centers on Kirk's own philosophy.
He believed, according to these sources, that dialogue, even aggressive dialogue, was the way to avoid violence. That when people stop talking, violence fills the vacuum.
So now, the dialogue guy himself has been silenced by violence. For his supporters, this confirms the very danger he warned about. The question left hanging is, how does society, particularly the political center, adapt? What happens now to prevent the escalation that virtually all these sources seem to fear is already happening?
Okay, let's unpack this. A truly shocking political assassination has just fractured the national conversation. It's unleashed not just, grief and outrage, but this immediate flood of celebrations, misinformation, and some really high-profile professional fallout. We're talking, of course, about the death of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk.
Exactly. And our deep dive mission today feels pretty essential because the actual fact, the hard legal evidence, the physical evidence, they're already getting buried under layers of really highly charged political narratives.
Yeah, it's happening fast.
So we're trying to cut through that noise, really examine the details that have been revealed about the alleged assassin Tyler Robinson, look at the specific legal framework being used against him, the intense cultural reaction, and the wildly conflicting conspiracy theories that just sprang up almost within hours.
And what's really striking when you look at the source material about the immediate aftermath is how quickly the reaction seemed to transcend politics and went straight into, the spiritual realm. Before the full legal details were even clear, the sources say this assassination sparked a kind of global Christian mobilization.
It's an extraordinary example, really, of an event being immediately claimed as a spiritual catalyst. The sources we looked at outline this response, citing Kirk's death as a direct call to action for Christians worldwide. And we're talking mobilization points mentioned from Sydney, Australia, all the way to the UK, Poland, Germany, even Tel Aviv.
Wow.
The message seemed clear. This was a moment to, quote, boldly stand for Jesus.
So they didn't just see it as a political tragedy. They framed it as a sign of spiritual warfare, using Kirk's death to promote evangelism, essentially. One source laid out 5 specific ways Christians could, and this is their phrase, boldly stand for Jesus today.
Right.
And this went beyond just, saying, I'll pray for you. It was more concrete.
Yeah, it moved into practical action. The specific advice included things like sharing parts of your personal living out your faithfully off old prayer. They even cited the directive from 1 Timothy 1, which urges that, supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanks made for all. The emphasis was really on immediate, unapologetic.
It's the practicality of that advice that's interesting, though. They encouraged people to be willing to look, quote, weird or uncommon to those around them by actually doing it. The aim seemed to be leveraging the intense public spotlight on the event to drive their core.
And there's a very specific kind of memorable anecdote in the source material illustrating this strategy. One speaker referenced a technique for evangelism that involves using a visible symbol of one's past life. In their specific example, it was a zodiac sign tattoo.
Okay.
And they noted that instead of removing the tattoo, they kept it precisely because it acts immediate conversation.
That's a fascinating pivot, actually. So they use the question someone might ask about the tattoo to immediately discuss their faith journey.
Absolutely. The response to what does that tattoo mean becomes a direct line to explaining how they used to worship the creation until I met the. It shows this highly organized, almost strategic mindset, seeing this public trauma as an opportunity, believing the harvest is plentiful and the workers are.
So that initial reaction, profound global spiritual response, completely interwoven with the political shockwave from the very beginning.
Exactly.
That really sets the stage for the intense legal and ideological investigation that followed. Now, let's pivot from that spiritual call to action to the stark reality of the legal case itself. Utah prosecutors, they did not hold back here.
No, they didn't. The sources reveal a highly detailed 10-page charging document filed against the alleged assassin, 22-year-old Tyler James Robinson.
And this document immediately established the severity and what the prosecution sees as the premeditated nature of the crime.
Right. Robinson faces a really powerful list of charges, headlined by aggravated murder, which, crucially, is a capital offense in Utah.
Capital offense.
He's also charged with felony discharge of a firearm causing serious bodily injury, 2 counts of obstruction of justice, and 2 counts of witness tampering, which we understand relate to the immediate sort of cleanup attempt after.
And crucially, there's that charge of a violent offense committed in the presence of a child. The documents confirm that children under the age of 14 were present during the assassination. That detail alone, regardless of who the victim was, just elevates the horrific nature of the crime.
It's devastating. But the legal cornerstone, really, of the prosecution's motive argument is the specific victim targeting enhancement.
Explain that a bit.
Well, this enhancement signals that the state doesn't see this as just a random act of violence. They allege Robinson intentionally selected Charlie Kirk because of his belief or perception regarding Kirk's political expression.
So that enhancement immediately tells the public and the court that the prosecution views this as a deliberate act of political hate, a calculated elimination, basically, of an ideological opponent. It kind of preempts potential defense arguments that might hinge on, say, generalized rage or some kind of non-specific mental break.
And the physical evidence backing up premeditation and motive seems exceptionally strong, according. Investigators recovered the weapon, a Mauser model 98.306 caliber bolt-action rifle. It was found near the UVU campus, wrapped in a dark towel, and it was equipped.
And that specific rifle type of bolt action, it's not typically an easy rapid-fire choice, right? It suggests deliberate targeting, accuracy, rather than just spontaneous chaos.
Precise. And the ballistics tied him directly to the weapon, too. They found shell casings near the rifle, and maybe more importantly, they discovered targets riddled with bullet holes back at Robinson's residence, confirming he had practiced. This really solidifies the element of calculation.
But the evidence of ideological motivation that was literally etched into the brass.
Yeah, this is undeniable, according. They confirmed that unfired casings explicitly read, "Hey, fascist, catch."
Wow.
And one fired casing apparently had the inscription, "Notices bulges," whatever that means, the "Hey, fascist" part, clearly links the alleged crime to an anti-fascist, maybe leftist ideology. There's just no ambiguity there regarding the killer's self-stated political target.
And here's where the story takes such a tragic personal turn. Robinson's arrest was actually facilitated by his own father, Matt Robinson, who is, get this, a 27-year veteran of the Washington County Sheriff's Department. The father apparently recognized the unique description of the rifle shown in news reports and realized his son had stolen. Just imagine that ethical collision. A career law enforcement officer recognizing an instrument used in a capital crime as one stolen by his own child.
It's unimaginable.
And the sources confirm that once confronted, Robinson confessed his intent to his father, which undoubtedly weighed heavily on the elder Robinson's decision to contact authorities. The legal response, as we said, has been uncompromised. The Utah County attorney filed a notice of intent to seek the death.
Right. And the sources stress this wasn't seen as a politically pressured move. The decision was apparently made independently, based purely on the evidence and the nature of the crime itself, a premeditated, politically motivated murder committed in the presence of children. Robinson is currently being held without bail.
And this high-stakes situation has necessitated some really extraordinary legal and correctional precautions.
Yeah, the sources detail these extreme security measures being implemented. Robinson is reportedly in specialized housing, completely isolated from the general prison population, with constant 147 surveillance in a brightly lit cell monitored by robots.
This level of security sounds like it goes far beyond standard procedure.
Well, the sources explicitly cite the Jeffrey Epstein incident as a driver for caution. Authorities are clearly focused entirely on ensuring this defendant makes it to trial, no question about it.
So they're taking every measure to prevent self-harm or, foul play.
Absolutely. This includes restricting standard items. He's apparently been issued anti-self-harm smocks, sometimes called turtles or pickles, which are incredibly difficult to tear or fashion, say, a noose.
Right.
And even basic items like regular sporks, pencils, even excessive amounts of toilet paper or napkins have been The legal system is essentially quarantining him to guarantee accountability in court.
That detail about the turtle suits and the constant light, it really drives home the gravity of the situation and the government's determination to see this prosecution through.
Okay, moving now to the complexity surrounding the assassin's personal life. This immediately became a flashpoint for intense scrutiny and, conflicting theory. Robinson's profile is, it seems, intrinsically linked to that of his roommate.
The roommate has been identified in the sources as someone transitioning from male to female, a transgender person. Sources noted a neighbor had apparently observed the roommate, who was described as dressing all in black, holding hands with Robinson about 2 weeks before the assassination.
Which suggests they appeared to be in some kind of romantic relation.
And the immediate aftermath of the crime itself is captured in that text message exchange, which was included in the charging document. These messages seem to paint a picture of Robinson scrambling to cover his track, while at the same time basically confessing his act.
Yeah, let's analyze those texts because they offer a deep, if maybe brief, look into his state of mind at that moment. After the shooting, Robinson admitted to being, quote, stuck in Orem and needing to grab his rifle.
Yeah.
Stating, "I had hoped to keep the secret till I died of old age page, and crucially, I'm sorry it involves you. That specific phrase, hope to keep this secret, it really reinforces the premeditation we were discussing.
Exactly. And the very next messages show this cold strategic turn toward, well, obstruction of justice. He explicitly instructed the roommate, delete this exchange, don't talk to the media. Please don't take any interviews or make any comments. If any police ask you questions, ask for a lawyer and stay silent.
He's giving legal advice, essentially.
Yeah, even while referencing his family situation. He notes his father, the one who turned him in, had been, quote, pretty diehard MAGA since Trump took office. There's an emotional element, though, captured in the roommate's reply. I'm much more worried about you.
Which is poignant given the circumstance. However, despite the nature of the crime and the relationship, the FBI has confirmed the roommate is cooperating.
Right.
And is not currently considered a suspect. They are being treated as a witness, not a co-conspirator in the killing itself.
Okay, but this whole situation, the hey fascist etching, the alleged anti-fascist alignment, the involvement of a transgender roommate, this immediately fueled a massive contested narrative about the motive, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. On one hand, sources cite this confluence of evidence as, a clear product of left-wing radicalization. The ideology on the bullet casing is unambiguous. The political opposition here, that narrative suggested Robinson was radicalized by anti-fascist rhetoric prominent U.S. climate.
But internally, within certain conservative circles, that narrative immediately fragmented. Skepticism arose instantly, leading to two major and kind of contradictory counter-theories.
Right. The first theory was that Robinson wasn't actually a leftist at all, but a, quote, groper. Now, for listeners who might not be familiar with that term.
Yeah, what does that mean in this context?
Groper is a term often used in these particular online circles to describe certain far-right extremists or dissidents who are often anti-Trump, anti-MAGA, and sometimes specifically anti-Charlie Kirk for various internal, often quite esoteric reasons related to nationalist or identitarian policy. So this theory suggests the FBI was misidentifying the killer's actual...
Okay, so that's one theory. What was the other one?
The second, and probably far more pervasive claim, was that the official story, including those text messages, was being fabricated or somehow doctored by the FBI or maybe the media, specifically to absolve the boyfriend, meaning the transgender roommate.
How so?
Critics claimed the messages sounded scripted, meaning they felt they lacked the genuine, spontaneous language you'd expect from people in crisis and instead sounded like, well, a fabricated cover story designed to fit a narrative.
And there was specific criticism aimed at the media reporting too, right?
Yes. The criticism against ABC News' Matt Gutman was particularly. Commentators accused him of essentially romanticizing the messages. They claimed he had fabricated phrases like my love, which they argued weren't in the original charging documents to create a sort of cutesy, sappy love story out of a political assassination.
And the implication there was?
The implication was that this humanized the alleged leftist killer and obscured the core ideological motive. They felt it was a deliberate attempt to muddy the water.
So we have this situation, a clear politically motivated confession backed by pretty strong physical evidence, yet a significant portion of the ideological spectrum is claiming it's potentially a setup or a false flag operation. It raises a huge question. Why, when the evidence seems so strong on its face, do these competing theories take hold so quickly?
Well, I think it's because the crime itself challenges a fundamental world held by the victim's ideological ally. Accepting that a self-identified anti-fascist or leftist was the culprit actually validates the conservative viewpoint of being under literal attack from the left. Rejecting that straightforward narrative allows for the possibility of a deeper, maybe more comforting, in a strange way, political conspiracy involving other actors. And this suspicion, this environment, is likely why the FBI is, according to sources, actively investigating local left-wing groups in Utah just in case.
That brings up a critical point about the FBI's approach. Given the strength of the evidence apparently pointing to Robinson acting alone, why commit resources to investigate potential co-conspirators in local leftist groups?
Right.
Is that standard?
It's about thoroughness. They simply cannot afford to miss a bigger picture, especially in a case this volatile. The FBI is using all the tools they have, including, reportedly, geofencing.
Explain geofencing quick.
It allows them to basically map out Robinson's contacts and activity around key locations by seeing what other mobile devices were present at specific times and places associated with his planning or movement. If Robinson was part of some organized cell, however unlikely it might seem right now, or if you received operational or even financial assistance, the FBI has to find it. It's about preventing future attacks. So this step even if it ultimately leads nowhere, is pretty standard due diligence in what looks like a domestic terrorism style.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's move now to the immediate aftermath on a more cultural level. The sheer volume of celebratory mockery directed at Kirk's death online and elsewhere quickly triggered what some sources started calling consequence culture.
Yeah.
And this led to some very high-profile professional fallout across various industries.
What really stands out is the speed and the severity of the corporate response here. This wasn't a slow burn. It was instantaneous reaction driven largely by public pressure and backlash. It exposed a kind of cold calculation. The fear of economic boycott or serious brand damage far outweighed any individual's perceived right to express even celebratory malice online.
The video game world gave us one of the most visible examples almost immediate. Bethesda, which, of course, is owned by Microsoft.
Right. Their official video game account posted a clip apparently mocking the assassination with the line, "Nice place you don't care much about these fascists, do you?" That seemed to implicitly support the alleged anti-fascist motive.
And the reaction.
Massive and immediate outcry. Bethesda deleted the tweet almost instantly, but the damage was done. The reaction led to demands for the social media manager's firing and even calls online to boycott Xbox and Game Pass. This situation really highlights how major corporations are caught in this impossible balancing act, right? Public relations dictated they distance themselves from the mockery immediately, treating it as emotionally disconnected and damaged brand.
Then you had the case of Starbucks. An employee apparently confirmed their internal systems were programmed to ban the name Charlie Kirk from printing on order stickers. This felt like a very different kind of political action.
Yeah, it was perceived quite differently. It was seen as a targeted political exclusion, which drew immediate contrast from commentators online. They pointed out that Starbucks publicly permits employees to wear things like Black Lives Matter or Pride apparel, questioning the supposed neutrality of a policy that seemed to single out one specific political figure for exclusion from a simple name tag system. Critics labeled the name ban as, quote, cringe and hypocritical.
The consequences reached into the publishing industry too, didn't they? A writer for DC Comics' Red Hood series.
Yes, he was fired, and his book was reportedly canceled after he openly celebrated Kirk's death online, calling him a loathsome and even an overt Nazi.
And he didn't back down, apparently.
No, he doubled down, which likely sealed his... He reportedly said he had no regret, claiming Kirk had advocated for people like... In this instance, the corporate calculation seemed different from Bethesda. Bethesda reacted to an employee acting on behalf of the brand, perhaps mistaken. DC Comics reacted to an author who used the event to aggressively rationalize, celebration of violence, making his continued employment politically untenable for them.
These disciplinary actions weren't just limited to elite media or creative industries either. There was that case involving an assistant manager at a Domino's Pizza in Nebraska.
Right, that one got a lot of...
Yeah.
He was fired after simply asking coworkers who were mocking Kirk's death to stop and keep politics out of the workplace.
Just asking for neutrality.
Exactly. And that specific case garnered intense scrutiny online and led to public pressure on Domino's to potentially reverse the decision. It raises a really important question about the boundaries of free speech and political expression in a private work. Is the simple act of trying to enforce neutrality grounds for termination? Or was the manager perceived, maybe by his colleagues or superiors, as defending the victim and thus inviting political reprisal? It's murky.
The same dynamics played out in mainstream television news as well. An MSNBC contributor was fired after making what the network called unacceptable and insensitive comments about the event.
And he defended his remarks, arguing he was just exposing the truth and hypocrisy surrounding what he called Kirk's perpetuation of hate.
But MSNBC leadership responded internally.
Yes, with an internal email stressing the absolute necessity of respectful exchange. And interestingly, they quoted Kirk's own word. When people stop talking really bad stuff.
Wow, using his own words in the memo.
That detail is incredibly striking. It shows a kind of desperate attempt by the network, perhaps, to reclaim the moral high ground and signal neutrality, even while taking a decisive HR action against their own contributors.
But probably the most headline-grabbing consequence involved the late-night comedy circuit. ABC reportedly canceled Jimmy Kimmel's late-night show, at least for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, the sources attributed this to what they called outrageous Charlie Kirk comments made by...
What were the alleged comments?
Apparently, Kimmel suggested the assassin might have actually been conservative, sort of floating a conspiracy theory himself. This provoked massive outrage, which the sources claim led directly to the show's cancellation or suspension. Kimmel himself was described as being livid and potentially exploring contract termination.
So whether the show was truly canceled long-term or just paused due to the intense pressure, the appearance of such severe corporate action in response to politically charged humor really demonstrates the extraordinary sensitivity surrounding this specific assassination.
Absolutely. And the push for accountability extended even into academia. Texas State University president, Dr. Kelly, directed immediate act to identify and potentially expel students who were seen on video mocking Kirk's death right there
On what ground?
citing that trivializing violence violates fundamental university values and, frankly, stains the institute's reputation. It was a very swift, top-down mandate affirming that while universities generally uphold free expression, they draw a hard line at the celebration or trivialization of violence.
The reaction overall was just profoundly polarized, even within specific demographic groups. We saw this really starkly among Black commentators and public figures.
Yes, it was quite divided. On one side, some Black pastors, according to the sources, used Kirk's death as a moment of what was described as racial idolatry. They openly called Kirk an unapologetic racist.
And they condemned the national honor being given to him.
Exact. They contrasted him very explicitly with figures like George Floyd, who they had celebrated in their churches, even observing moments of silence. Their argument was that Kirk sowed seeds of division and thus wasn't worthy of national mourning.
But conversely, we had high-profile mainstream figures like Stephen A. Smith, who took a very different stance.
Yes, Smith took a strong moral stance, calling out the lunatics celebrating the death, regardless of who the victim. He emphasized that, whatever your politics, a man was gunned down in front of two of his children who are 5 years of age or less.
Focusing on the humanity.
Precisely. He stressed the necessity of basic human decency and demanded accountability from the difference between those two reactions. One focused almost entirely on the victim's perceived moral character and political legacy. The other focused purely on the inhumanity of the act itself.
Okay, so as this intense grief and political chaos unfolded, the vacuum of solid information naturally filled up with conspiracy. We really need to methodically dissect and, where possible, debunk the primary claims that started circulating almost immediately after the event.
Right. This often happens in these high-stakes political events, doesn't it? When people are either unable or unwilling to accept the simplest answer, perhaps a single radicalized individual, they start seeking complex explanations involving powerful secret actors. In this case, the sources point to three main vectors of conspiracy theory: Israel, Kirk's own security detail, and Donald Trump.
The Israel-Jewish conspiracy theory was one of the wildest, it seemed. This suggested Kirk was assassinated because he had supposedly turned on Israel or was seen as insufficiently pro-Israel in recent.
Yeah, Candace Owens specifically fueled this narrative, implying that the Jewish billionaire Bill Ackman and others had perhaps berated Kirk for his stance on Israel, even suggesting threats or blackmail might have occurred at an event Ackman had hosted.
Despite Kirk's history.
Despite Kirk being a longtime, very vocal Zionist supporter, the theory gained traction in certain corners anyway.
But Ackman responded directly.
Yes, Ackman publicly and unequivocally denied what he called slander, refuting any allegations of threats or blackmail, and many conservative commentators themselves strongly denounced the theory, calling it insane and dangerously divisive.
The logic just didn't hold up for them.
Not at all. They stressed that Kirk was known as a staunch, proud Zionist who had even written a supportive letter to Benjamin Netanyahu not long before. The idea that Israel, or prominent pro-Israel figures, would assassinate arguably their number one pro-Israel voice in the U.S. conservative movement was immediately dismissed by those closest to Kirk's circle as ridiculous and frankly destructive.
Okay, so that's the Israel theory. The next set of theories centered around Kirk's security detail, alleging they were somehow complicit in the assassination, maybe using covert hand signals to coordinate the hit. This seemed to rely heavily on frame-by-frame analysis of grainy cell phone video.
Thankfully, a former member of Kirk's security detail provided some crucial context that directly debunked these very specific technical theories. For example, there was a man seen repeatedly adjusting his sleeves in one video clip,
Which conspiracists claimed was a signal.
Exactly, but the guard explained that this individual was simply loosening tight sleeves or maybe shaking his arms out, a standard preparatory movement for someone on security duty, needing to be ready to react quick, not a secret sign.
What about other claims, like blood bags exploding or a ring switching fingers?
Right, those were equally dramatic. The alleged blood bags exploding were attributed simply to the poor quality, heavily zoomed in, and slowed down cell phone footage distorting the image of the impact, and the ring supposedly switching fingers between frames.
Yeah.
Kirk apparently had a known habit of fiddling with his hinged ring, so the changes captured on video were likely simple, self-directed movements, not some hidden signal. The security detail, according to this former guard, was simply reacting, maybe imperfectly in the chaos, to a sudden, violent, unexpected attack.
The final major conspiracy vector concerned the official handling of the investigation itself, specifically the transfer of jurisdiction from local police to the FBI. Some saw this handover as an immediate sign of a cover-up.
Yeah, and we need to be really clear on this point based on the sources. The transfer of the case from the local campus police to the FBI was almost certainly standard procedure for a case magniplex.
Why standard?
Well, local campus police departments typically have very limited resources, maybe only 20 officers total. They simply lack the manpower, the specialized technical capabilities like the geofencing we discussed, and the broader jurisdictional reach needed to handle a capital murder investigation that potentially spans multiple states and involves possible domestic terrorism links. The FBI takeover wasn't about secrecy. It was mandated by the sheer scale and nature of the crime.
Okay, that clarifies that point. Finally, let's address the Trump angle, which seemed to cause some friction even among Kirk's political allies. Kirk was known as a longtime friend and political ally of Trump, helping with his first campaign way back in 2015.
Right. And the sources noted the visible public absence of Donald Trump from key events drew criticism from some right-wing. They were reportedly shocked and disappointed that he did not attend a major vigil and memorial service held for Kirk at the Kennedy Center. Instead, Trump was reportedly spending that weekend golfing and focusing on business matters. There were even reports of him commenting that he received the news while working on plans for a beautiful new ballroom.
And this was viewed poorly by some.
Yes, by some within his own base, it was viewed as a form of political abandonment, a betrayal even of a 31-year-old friend and political protege during what should have been a crucial moment of unity and mourning for the conservatives. It just added another layer of internal stress and controversy to an already incredibly chaotic period.
Okay, so if we synthesize everything we've covered in this deep dive, the legal picture against Tyler Robinson looks exceptionally strong. The premeditation seems backed by solid physical evidence, the specific Mauser rifle, the alleged confession to his father, and that undeniable political hate motives confirmed by the bullet head. Hey, fascist, catch.
Right. And he is facing the death penalty in Utah, being held in a highly secure, isolated environment specifically designed to ensure he stands trial. No doubt.
But the assassination itself was clearly more than just a crime. It acted like an ideological stress test for the entire American public square. It immediately exposed these deep, frankly ugly divisions. It led to public celebrations, which in turn triggered severe professional consequences across media, tech, and public. This whole consequence culture dynamic forced rapid, often brutal calculations among corporations desperate to avoid any kind of ideological contamination or back.
And that post-event chaos was just amplified by the competing narratives flying around. You had the official story pointing to left-wing radicalization confirmed by the physical evidence. Then you had these internal conservative theories questioning the FBI's integrity, alleging maybe a grouper was actually responsible, or even suggesting some high-level conspiracy involving foreign powers. Incredibly, Kirk's own security.
Yeah.
These conflicting claims just cemented the feeling, for many, of profound ideological conflict. And the sources noted a deep loss of security felt by public figures who engage in controversial or even just political dialogue.
Which brings us to a critical final thought or question for our listeners to consider. We know Robinson's legal counsel is legally required to receive all discovery related to the case from the prosecution, considering the FBI's extensive ongoing investigation, including that use of geofencing to map out his contact, potentially with left-wing groups in Utah, to definitively rule out co-conspirators. What specific pieces of evidence from that full discovery package, things beyond the text messages and bullet etchings we've already discussed, will ultimately define the public's, and perhaps more importantly, the jury's final understanding of Robinson's true motive and the extent, if any, of his radicalization.
That's the key question. Unrevealed details, they will likely determine whether the final narrative picked up online. An event that really shook the American political landscape. We're doing an intense examination of the assassination of Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, and this deep dive is crucial because the sources we've gathered, investigation reports, personal accounts, the media frenzy, they paint a picture that's much bigger than just one tragic event.
Absolutely. It feels like a culmination of this toxic political rhetoric we've seen building.
That's exactly the mission, to carefully navigate all this highly charged material, the tragedy itself, the political fallout, the fights within the conservative movement, and what it all says about society. We have to stick just to the facts and the arguments in these sources to give you, the listener, a clear, factual understanding.
Because it's not just about what happened.
Right. It's why the reaction was what it was. Yeah. That tells us so much about, well, the health of our public square.
It really does. And with something this big, the truth gets buried fast under all the noise, grief, anger, celebration even, political. What really struck me looking through all this was that dissonance you meant. The brutal reality, a young man killed in public, family watching, and then this immediate, almost surreal public split.
Total opposites.
You gotta cut through that.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the cold, hard facts of the crime itself.
So the setting was Utah Valley University, UVU. Charlie Kirk was there for a public debate event right out on campus.
Engaging with the audience.
Exactly. And the sources emphasize he was shot while he was in the middle of that discussion. He was only 31, really at the peak of his influence.
And the detail that just hits you. His family was there. His wife, Erica, and their 2 little kids, both 5 or younger. They saw it happen.
Just horrific. And the shooting itself, the details are chilling. The sources describe it as a single, very accurate kill shot, deliberate.
And the weapon wasn't what you might initially assume. The investigation found it was a bolt-action rifle.
Right. Basically a standard manually operated deer rifle, not the semi-automatic assault weapon label that gets thrown around a lot in media reports.
That detail feels significant.
It absolutely is. A bolt action means you have to manually cycle it after each shot. It's not for spraying bullets. It's for planned accuracy, likely from a distance. It really underscores that this wasn't some random outburst. It played strongly towards a targeted, premeditated political assassination.
Okay, so let's talk about the person who pulled the trigger. The assassin was identified as Tyler Robinson, 22 years old.
And his background, academically at least, is completely counterintuitive for this kind of act.
Right. High-achieving student, 4.0 GPA, really high ACT scores, like 34 out of 36. He was at Utah State on a full scholarship.
It's this profile of, outward success masking something much darker happening internally. A rapid radicalization.
And his family noticed it. They told investigators he'd changed drastically in the last year, became more political, specifically gone leftist.
And they pointed to a specific influence, what they called trans ideology. This apparently came about because his roommate, who he was close with, referred to as my love in texts, was transitioned.
The timing of the actual shot seems directly linked to. The sources say Kirk was hit right after answering a question from the crowd about trans violence.
That sequence strongly suggests Robinson wasn't just randomly firing, but reacting very specifically to Kirk's stance on a really charged cultural issue.
And the premeditation wasn't just the weapon choice or the timing, it was her.
Disturbingly so. Law enforcement found engraved bullet casings at the scene.
Engraved? What did they say?
The message was, hey, fascist cat. It's like the ultimate endpoint of that dehumanizing rhetoric we need to talk about later, making the murder a personal political statement.
Wow. And despite this planning, the sources say he was also sloppy, left clues.
Yeah, breadcrumbs, as law enforcement put it. Yeah. He confessed pretty quickly on Discord, that chat platform.
What was the message?
Something like, hey guys, I have bad news for you all. It was me at UVU yesterday. I'm sorry for all of this.
An apology mixed with a confession. Strange.
Very. And then investigators recovered text messages between Robinson and his roommate. Those texts laid bare just how planned this was.
How long had he been planning?
The text indicated a bit over a week. He talked about the act itself, mentioned needing to pick up his rifle from a drop point he'd set up.
So, undeniable premeditation.
Undeniable. And what's fascinating, or perhaps disturbing, is how the investigation sources noted the media framing differed from the raw transcripts.
So?
The text showed this really intimate back and forth, Robinson calling his partner my love, even while he's confessing to this brutal political murder.
And the media focused on?
Well, many reports highlighted the intimate portrait or the touching nature of their relation, almost overshadowing the cold confession of terrorism within those same messages.
So kind of humanizing the shooter, maybe unintentional, or distracting from...
That's the question the sources raised. Was it about humanizing him, or was it a way to sidestep the stark ideological motive? And another point, the roommate apparently didn't go to the police voluntarily.
Really? Even after those texts?
Not until confronted by law enforcement, according to the reports, despite knowing exactly what Robinson did and texting with him right after.
That effort to maybe separate the killer's personal life from the political act, that seems like a recurring theme. We'll see.
It creates this real cognitive dissonance, right?
Yeah.
This high-achieving, seemingly loving person who is also capable of calculated, politically driven murder. It challenges easy narratives.
It forces you to look at how mainstream polarization can actually fuel extreme violence.
Precisely. And that brings us from the crime scene, from the killer's profile, to the massive shockwave this sent out. The reaction was immediate and intense. The fallout was just immediate and starkly divided. On one side, you had this deep principal grief, and on the other, just shocking celebration.
Let's start with the grief, the leg. His wife, Erica Kirk, her response was incredibly powerful.
It really set the tone. She gave this address almost immediately a real battle cry. She declared that the movement her husband built will not die. Just immense strength in the face of horror.
Framing it as fuel for the cause.
Exactly. And that reflects how people close to Kirk saw him. The sources are full of descriptions: above reproach, a good friend, not what he seemed, if you only knew the critics.
Friends emphasized his faith, right?
Deeply. They stressed he saw his main mission as defending the gospel, even more than just political campaign. That Christian faith is central to the martyrdom narrative that formed in.
His style was also key to it. He wasn't afraid to engage.
Not at all. He was known for deliberately seeking out open and honest discussion with anyone. The sources mention him debating atheists on stage, even OnlyFans models, porn stars. He sought engagement, not echo chambers.
His catchphrase was, "Prove me wrong," wasn't it?
That's right. And even with people who completely opposed his views or lifestyle, he'd often say, "Jesus loves all of you." That combination, willingness to debate anyone, but grounding it in faith, solidified his image for support.
So for them, this wasn't just a murder.
No, it was immediately seen as a political assassination and, crucially, a religious martyrdom. It was framed as a fundamental turning point for free speech and faith in America.
Senator J.D. Vance spoke about it too.
He did. He called it a clear case of good versus evil. And he noted that the tragedy itself was already pushing people back towards God and faith, simply because they were confronted with such pure, just...
But then there's the other side, the immediate malice.
Yeah, the celebratory part. It was jarring and terrifyingly public.
Yeah.
Mocking, cheering, the murder interrupted instantly on social media. Places like Blue Sky became hot spots for really vile stuff.
And not just anonymous trolls.
No, that's the disturbing part. Public figures, political figures joined in. The sources name Abby Chatfield, an Australian TV personality, Senator Fatima Payman.
And college students too.
Yes, several students got expelled for their comment. One quote that was cited was just horrifically callous, something like, "Who give about no white boy getting put on his just raw dehumanization?"
Did this mockery just happen, or was there pushback?
Oh, there was significant pushback. It led to what some sources called a consequence culture kicking in. Several high-profile people faced serious professional fallout.
Like Jimmy Kimmel.
Exactly. His late-night show was pulled indefinitely by ABC Next Star Media. They cited his disgusting comments that seemed to encourage laughing about Kirk's death.
That's a major network taking a stand.
A huge moment. The sources suggest it was seen as necessary accountability, that even celebrity status couldn't shield you from consequences for celebrating political merger like that. It signaled the line had been crossed publicly.
The controversy reached religious figures too, didn't it? The woke pastor.
Right, Reverend Dr. Howard John Wesley. He publicly slammed the decision to fly flags at half-staff for Kirk, called him an unapologetic racist who spread seeds of division and hate and didn't deserve the honor.
How was that received?
Very poorly, especially by other faith leaders. They didn't just disagree politically, they challenged him theologically, called him a false prophet. Their argument was that his condemnation, his politicizing of grief, was itself deeply divisive and hateful. They focused on the need to respect life and mourn the dead, regardless of politics, framing Wesley's comments as spiritually damaged.
So intense infighting domestically. What about the official response?
In stark contrast, the official U.S. and international response was one of uniform respect. President Trump ordered flags at half-staff until Sunday evening.
And internationally.
Leaders from Hungary, Argentina, Israel, among others, reached out personally. It really highlighted Kirk's unexpected global influence, especially within conservative youth movement. His reach and TPUSA's reach was significant. But just as people were trying to process the shock and grief, this huge internal conflict exploded within the conservative movement itself. And it centered on Candace Owen.
Right. She came out very quickly with some really explosive insinuations.
Extremely explosive. She basically publicly hinted, though without offering any concrete evidence, that Jewish donors and potentially Israel were somehow involved, or at least had put immense pressure on Kirk right before he died.
She named names too, didn't she?
She did. Specifically mentioned Bill Ackman, the billionaire financier, and even Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Her suggestion was that Kirk was having some kind of spiritual transformation, moving away from those alliances, and that pressure related to that shift was connected to his death.
And part of her claim was about money.
Yes. She alleged that Kirk's top Jewish donors were pulling funding and demanding their names be taken off TPUSA bill, Turning Point USA, his organization. The narrative she pushed was that Kirk was being financially squeezed and harassed because his views were changing.
Okay, so we need context. What were Kirk's views on Israel and Jewish influence? Had they actually...
It's nuanced. The sources confirm he had recently become more critical of the influence of what he termed secular Jews.
Secular Jews specifically.
Yes, he criticized their funding of radical opener, neoliberal, quasi-Marxist policies and cultural institutions. He had a quote saying, "This is a beast created by secular Jews."
But that's different from being anti-Israel, isn't it?
Exactly, the distinction the sources emphasized. His critique seemed focused on the political and cultural impact of certain secular leftist funding sources, not on Israel's right to exist or U.S. support for it. In fact, people very close to him insisted he still loved Israel. Ironically, they said he was literally prepping his best Israel oral argument the night before he was killed.
So, a huge gap between his actual nuanced critique and the broad anti-Semitic implications Owen.
A massive gap. And this led to a direct clash over a specific event, the Hampton.
What was Owens' claim about that?
She portrayed it as this hostile intervention with Bill Ackman, where Kirk was ambushed, donors pulled funding, demanded their names off buildings, basically a pressure campaign.
And the other side, the receipts, as they were called,
came out immediately. Bill Ackman himself and senior TPUSA staff flatly contradicted her entire story. They provided detail. They clarified the event wasn't even at Ackman's home. It was at a hotel, and its purpose wasn't hostile at all. It was a cordial debate training session.
Training?
Yeah, specifically designed to teach young conservative leaders how to effectively argue both pro- and anti-Israel viewpoints. The goal was better debating skill, not coercion.
So the opposite of a hostile intervention.
Completely. The TPUSA staff were adamant. No donors pulled funding. No one demanded names off buildings. Ackman actually covered the cost of the whole training event. He was donating resources, not withdrawing them. The staff said they spoke out because Owens' claims were just false and deeply disrespectful while they were mourning. They felt she was exploiting the tragedy.
She also brought up the call from Netanyahu.
Yes, she framed that call, which happened less than 24 hours after Kirk's death, offering condolences and an invitation to an anti-Semitism conference as suspicious, like it was direct, or an attempt to control the narrative quickly.
And the counter-narrative
Was much more straightforward. Sources confirmed that because of Kirk's global influence, many world leaders reached out. The invitation wasn't duress. It was seen as a sign of respect for his impact. And people close to Kirk said he was open to it, saw it as engagement, not manipulation.
This whole thing got so bad that Kirk's own
Pastor Rob McCoy, yes.
Yeah.
He released a really powerful public statement directed at Owen. He pleaded with her to be the friend to Charlie that he was to her, even quoting Proverbs.
He lamented her timing.
Deeply lamented her actions during a time of intense grief. And he added a significant detail about Kirk's character that even though Kirk disagreed with Owens on something, like her views on Ackman, he never spoke badly of her publicly. He showed a loyalty she didn't seem to return.
It just lays bare this internal fracture, doesn't it? Using his death as leverage in an existing ideological fight within
a tragedy on top of a tragedy. It turned his legacy into another battleground, almost immediately. And we really need to connect all these pieces. Now, the assassination, the reactions, the Owens controversy, back to the root cause identified in the source, the culture of political rhetoric itself.
It's heartbreakingly ironic, isn't it? Kirk himself had warned about this.
Exactly. Multiple sources point this out. He had publicly stated that assassination culture is spreading on the left. He'd blown the whistle on this exact danger only to become its victim.
Which brings us to the core argument presented across these materials.
Which is that the constant dehumanizing language used against conservatives is seen as directly responsible for inspiring this kind of political violence, this terrorism.
We're talking about terms like
fascist, Nazi, white nationalist, death cult. When these labels are relentlessly applied by prominent media figures and politicians to their opponent,
it lowers the bar for violence.
Dramatically. The argument is simple. If you successfully convince people that their political opponent is literally Hitler or a genocidal threat, then violence doesn't just become permissible. It can start to seem moral, necessary. The opponent's life becomes forfeit in that mindset. The natural barrier against violence just crumbles when the target is successfully painted as less than human, as pure evil.
That's a terrifying progression, and it leads right into that crucial philosophical point the sources raise. Words are not violence. Violence is violence.
Yes, there's strong criticism in these materials aimed at anyone, including some conservatives, who argued that Kirk's own political speech constituted hate speech or was a form of violence.
Because conflating the two is dangerous.
Extremely dangerous. The sources are clear. Saying offensive or even extreme speech is violence provides the intellectual justification, the moral permission slip for actual physical violence in response. It's seen as the foundational justification for what Tyler Robinson did. His engraved bullet, "Hey, fascist, catch," becomes the logical outcome of that rhetoric.
Do the sources offer evidence that this kind of thinking, this justification for violence?
They do cite some specific data and examples framing the issue as somewhat asymmetrical. Now, they're careful they acknowledge crazies exist on all sides.
Of course.
But they argue, based on polling and incidents, that the lunatics in American politics today are proud members of the far left. We need to be clear, we're reporting the claims and the sources here.
Understood. What kind of polling?
Well, one poll cited suggested, if accurate, that 48% of self-identified liberals felt it was somewhat justified to murder Elon Musk.
Wow, almost half.
And that number apparently jumped to 55% when asked about the justification for murdering Donald Trump.
Those are staggering numbers, suggesting a normalization of political murder as a concept for a significant group.
Troubling. to say the least. And it wasn't just hypothetical. The sources point to real-world harassment escalating, like activists doxing people connected to Kirk while they were mourning, publishing private info to silence or intimidate.
And the example involving J.D. Vance's children.
Just awful. His young kids being harassed at Disneyland, a woman reportedly yelling at his 5-year-old son, "You should disown your dad, you little shit,"
targeting children.
It shows the demonization has gone beyond the political figure to their family, reinforcing this idea that the opponent is so irredeemably evil that their entire circle is fair game. It's a total collapse of basic decency.
So, given all this, the murder, the celebration, the rhetoric, what's the takeaway for Kirk supporters, according to the sources? How do they see the path forward?
The consensus described as firm. This is not a time to compromise. No pretending there can be unity with those who despise life, truth, and freedom. The feeling is that a line was irrevocably crossed.
But what does that mean in practice? More division.
The push described is for accountability, not just anger. And crucially, the sources stress the answer isn't new censorship laws. Conservatives explicitly reject that, arguing it undermines the free speech they value.
So not fighting speech with speech restrictions. Then what?
Vigorous, impartial enforcement of existing laws, focus on legally dismantling organizations that actively foment violence or engage in doxing, making sure terrorism laws are applied fairly, regardless of the perpetrator's ideology.
So enforce the boundary between words and actions.
Exactly. Target the violence itself and those who demonstrably incite it, but don't try to regulate the political speech itself, however harsh it might be. That's the line they draw. The fear expressed in the sources is that without that kind of road, an endpoint, but just a grim warning of what's to come if the rhetoric isn't addressed.
Wow. This deep dive, looking through all these sources, it really paints a picture far bigger than just one horrific. We've seen an assassination clearly rooted in ideological hate that the sources argue was directly fueled by mainstream dehumanizing language. And the reaction, it was just incredibly stark, from that profound grief and Erica Kirk's powerful battle cry to outright celebration and even the cynical exploitation of his death for internal political.
And if we connect all that to the bigger picture, you have to wonder about Charlie Kirk's ultimate legacy. It might just be the brutal moral clarity his death forced upon everyone. It made it impossible to ignore how political talk had decayed into this assassination cult. The immediate, wildly polarized reaction was like taking the temperature of the nation's civic health, and the reading was, frankly, terrifying.
The lesson seems unavoidable. The words matter. They build the foundation.
They really do. They can justify the unthinkable.
This really does feel like a potential turning point, doesn't it? Like maybe a post-9/11 moment for political forcing a kind of
It could be. It feels that significant.
So the final thought for you, the listener, as you process all this intense material. If political rhetoric can so quickly escalate to violence, what's the responsibility of the individual citizen? What's your responsibility in maybe pushing back against dehumanizing language, trying to protect actual debate? Where do you personally draw that line between passionate disagreement and speech that enables violence?
Okay, let's unpack this.
Welcome to the deep.
Today we're tackling something pretty heavy, an event that really just shattered any illusion of maybe stability in American political discussion. I'm talking about the assassination of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, it was an unprecedented act, really. Political violence that sent shockwaves far beyond just the shooting itself. It instantly exposed these deep, deep fault lines, the volatile ones dividing society.
Absolutely. It felt like a watershed moment.
It really was. And what's so striking and what our sources immediately show is how the event didn't just cause grief. It fractured everything. The media landscape, public reaction. You instantly had these dueling, intensely politicized stories about why it happened.
Competing narratives from minute one.
Exactly. About the killer's motives, the investigation, and the public reaction, which was, extreme doesn't quite cover it, sometimes shockingly celebrated.
Right. So for you listening, our goal today is clarity. We've pulled together a deep stack of sources. We're looking at everything, the investigation minute by minute, the frankly very confusing and competing stories about the killer's real motives.
The public reactions, the grief on one side, the open celebration on the other, and then the corporate and political fallout that just cascaded after.
So our mission here is strict impartiality. We want to dissect the evidence that's available, try to understand the ideological battle lines that were drawn immediately.
And really examine what this whole incident signifies about where public discourse is right. And maybe more worryingly, the rising risk of political violence, not just in the U.S., but maybe across the West. We need to get past just what happened and try to understand why the rhetoric turned into actual physical.
Okay, let's start with the content. The event itself and the man. Charlie Kirk. He was shot while speaking at an outdoor event. This was at Utah Valley University.
Right. And sources noted his very presence there was already causing division on...
Yeah, these events were kind of designed to be confrontational, weren't they?
Yeah.
And UVU was no different. Campus groups were apparently debating if he should even be allowed to speak there.
And the timing of the attack itself is, well, chillingly precise. Surveillance footage tracked the suspect, Tyler Robbins. It shows him arriving on campus, and it seems clear he had a specific deadly purpose.
How quick was it?
Sources confirm he arrived at 11:52 a.m. The shooting took place just 6 minutes later.
Wow, 6 minutes.
Yeah. It suggests this wasn't some, random flare-up of anger. This looks like a swiftly executed plan by someone who knew exactly where Kirk would be and what they intended to...
So to really get the impacts, we need to look at Kirk himself and his movement. He wasn't just another commentator, was he?
No, definitely not. He was a really dynamic, I'd say transformative figure in modern conservative activism, founder of Turning Point USA, TPUSA, it's a high-energy organization. And he positioned himself as like a foundational figure for the modern conservative movement. Very outspoken.
A lightning rod off.
Absolutely. On politics, culture, religion. His approach was pretty unique, which is probably why he became such a target. He actively went looking for direct, unfiltered engagement with students on college campuses.
Which is different, right? A lot of pundits stick to studios.
Exactly. He went right into what many conservatives see as the heart of the opposition. He'd set up these open mic debates, famously.
And he didn't shy away from the hot button stuff.
Not at all. Family structure, traditional marriage, transgender issues, he tackled them head on. Sources noted his method worked because he somehow made conservative ideas seem, well, palatable, maybe even cool, as some said, to a younger audience.
An audience that often found traditional Republican politics maybe a bit stodgy.
Right. Unrelatable. He spoke their language,
Yeah.
used social media heavily.
And here's something that surprises a lot of people reading the background. He never actually went to college himself.
Yeah. And that lack of sort of formal higher education seems to have fueled his drive. He compensated. He said himself he was a sponge of knowledge, read every damn thing he could get his hands on. He wanted to be armed for any.
And that self-education shaped his debating style, didn't it? I saw a description from Mike R., another conservative commentator who debated him.
What did he say?
He described Kirk in person as, surprisingly, gracious, polite, argued kindly, let opponents talk, and then the quote was he would rhetorically destroy them politely.
The happy warrior idea, but maybe taken to an extreme. He seemed to genuinely believe that tough debate was necessary, not just to score points, but to teach, clarify conservative ideas through that confrontation. And that clarity made him really influential.
And that influence translated into serious political power, especially with younger voters. That seems to be his real legacy.
Definitely. He actually advised Donald Trump's campaign to essentially bypass traditional media, forget the big networks, the major papers.
Go digital.
Exactly. Leverage platforms like his own podcast, social media, reach younger voters directly where they actually are.
And the data back that up, right?
Yeah.
Something like 86% of Gen Z get news.
Yeah, the source put it at 86% digital news consumption for Gen Z versus only 8% from TV. Kirk understood that if you weren't on YouTube, TikTok, streaming, you just weren't talking to the next generation.
And the results pretty significant.
Hugely consequential. This digital push correlated with Trump becoming the first Republican nominee this century to actually win males under 25 in the presidential election.
Wow.
First this century. Yeah. And Kirk's own podcast was consistently huge. Top 10 in news charts. It shows the size, the dedication of the audience he built, an audience that became a real political force.
His wife, Erica, she emphasized something else too, didn't she? About his core motivation.
She did. She stressed that for him, the movement came from deep personal faith and a commitment to the family. She said his top priority was reviving the American family structure.
And how he wanted to be remembered.
For his faith and courage. She called him a martyr for truth and freedom. That framing martyrdom really underscores this idea that came up immediately. The assassin's veto.
Yeah, that phrase is chilling. The idea that if you can't win the argument, you just eliminate the speaker.
Exactly. His wife argued that the violence would backfire, though. That it would turn him into a legend, ignite a fire, create, quote, an infinite number of more Charlie Kirks.
And she confirmed the movement, TPUSA events, they're all continuing, even intensifying.
Yes, she did. The message was clear.
Yeah.
We're not backing down.
It's a terrifying idea, the ultimate form of censorship.
Yeah.
But now we have to shift gears because while many immediately framed the motive as political, the actual evidence, the stuff police found, that told a much, much more confusing story.
Yeah, it really did. And that confusion is critical to understanding the chaos that followed.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at that confusing evidence from the immediate investigation because the complexity, the contradictions around the suspect's motive just threw fuel on the fire in the media.
Okay, so the shooter, Tyler Robinson, 22 years old. And significantly, no prior criminal record.
Not at all.
Apparently not. After the shooting, sources say he made a pretty frantic escape, fled the scene, went to the other side of the building, jumped off the roof.
Jumped off the roof. That doesn't sound like panic. That sounds like a plan.
It suggests some level of planning, yeah. Or at least familiarity with the area. Then he ran into a nearby neighborhood.
And the weapon.
The manhunt eventually found it, a high-powered bolt-action rifle, in a wooded area near campus, along with key forensic evidence, a palm print, forearm.
So a specific weapon choice. Powerful, precise, confirms intent.
Definitely intent to kill. Robinson was captured, charged, and the prosecutor immediately sought the death penalty, citing aggravating factors like homicide knowing children were present, and crucially, based on Kirk's political expression.
But the confusion.
Yeah.
It centered on the bullet casings, right? What was written on them?
Exact. This is where the ideological battle lines got drawn instantly because the evidence seemed to point everywhere at once. It was like a political Venn diagram from hell. On one side, you had clear left-wing indicators.
Okay, like
phrases like, hey, fascist, pretty standard anti-authoritarian, often Antifa-associated language. But more specific, one casing had Bellaccia.
Bellaccia?
Yeah. For anyone unfamiliar, sources identify Bellaccia as the title of an Antifa song. That's a very specific kind of niche reference. It suggests some real interest or immersion in radical leftist culture.
But his family said something too.
Right. Robinson's family told investigators he'd become intensely political and that he intensely disliked Kirk for, quote, spreading hate. Again, language very common on the radical left to describe figures like Kirk.
Okay, so that seems pretty clear-cut. But then
right alongside those, you had these completely baffling alt-right online indicators. And these are the phrases that led many in the media to push a totally different narrative.
What kind of phrase?
Things like, notices bulge, an emoticon, a specific internet. And the phrase, if you read this, you are gay, these are tied directly to very specific, often offensive, internet
Memes from where?
Sources link these particular phrases to things like online furry culture and also the groper.
Okay, hold on. Groper movement. You need to unpack that.
Right. It's deep internet jargon. The groper movement, Groyper, is loosely associated with the white nationalist and alt-right provocateur Nick Fuentes.
Nick Fuentes. Okay, I know him. He and Kirk had a feud, didn't they? A very public one.
Exactly. A bitter. Fuentes often attacked Kirk for being too mainstream, not radical. So finding Groyper-related memes on the casings, bizarre.
Wait, let me get this straight. You have evidence pointing towards Antifa, the song, the family statement, but also evidence pointing towards a far-right group whose leader hated the victim.
Yeah, it's incredibly contradictory.
How do you even interpret that?
Well, it suggests a few possibilities. None of them. One, Robinson had a genuinely mixed-up, chaotic ideology, just grabbing stuff from different extremes online. Two, he was trying to frame the left using right-wing memes as a false flag. Or three, he was trying to frame the right using left-wing slogans as a flag.
Or just deep immersion in that toxic online culture where irony and ideology get completely blurred.
That seems very likely. The phrases themselves often function as provocative, confusing, edgelord humor online. It just muddies the waters even further, makes determining a clear motive credible.
And then there was another layer, the transgender angle.
Yes. The Utah governor confirmed this was a key focus for investigators. Reports confirmed Robinson's roommate was his boyfriend, who was transitioning from male to female, identified as Lance Twit, and he's cooperating with authorities.
Okay, so how does that fit in?
This is crucial. It suggests a possible emotionally driven motive that might supersede all the confusing online jargon. Twiggs' family apparently stated that he, the partner, held strong anti-conservative and anti-Christian, which kind of mirrors the spreading hate motive that Robinson's own family mentioned.
So the speculation became maybe this wasn't primarily about Antifa or Groypers, but about protecting his partner.
Exactly. That the real motive was personal, tied directly to Kirk's very strong critical stance on transgender. Maybe Robinson saw Kirk's platform as a direct attack on his partner and acted to, quote, protect trans people from hate.
That narrative seemed to gain a lot of weight when the text messages came out.
Yes, the FBI released text message evidence that gave this harrowing, immediate psychological snapshot of Robinson right after the act.
What did they say?
There was one sent from Robinson to his partner, apparently right after. Still okay, my love, but I'm stuck in Orem for a while. Shouldn't be long until I come home, but I gotta grab my rifle. To be honest, I'd hope to keep this till I died. I'm sorry to involve you.
Hope to keep this secret till I died of old age? Wow, that speaks volumes. Planned, yet personal.
It really does. It suggests planning, but also this immediate shock, the personalization. It's not just abstract politics anymore. It's this tragic secret that's now out. And when the partner apparently texted back after it, Robinson just replied, I am sorry.
I am sorry. A moment of regret, or maybe just shock. It confirms the deep personal connection, but also maybe difficulty facing what he'd just done. It seems very different from the cold, calculated language on the casings.
Right, and that complex psychological state seemed visible in court, too. Body language analysis noted a distinct lack of emotion. He withdrew his lips when his rights against self-incrimination were read, suggesting he was trying hard not to speak, withdrawing into himself.
And he was put on suicide.
Placed in a suicide robe in jail, yeah. Indicating severe mental distress or shock right after.
Okay, so we have this mess of conflicting evidence. Antifa slogans, alt-right memes, a possible personal protective motive, immediate shock, and maybe regret. This vacuum of clarity, it was like a magnet for partisan narratives, wasn't it? Leading straight into the war of narrative.
Precisely. The political stakes were just so incredibly high. Clarity seemed less important than controlling the story. The investigation was barely started, but the political world rushed to define the shooter before all the facts.
The official stance came fast. The Utah governor, Spencer Cox, he seemed quite firm.
Very firm. He stated the investigation made it very clear that Robinson was, quote, doubly indoctrinated with leftist ideology, and that this drove him to murder.
And President Trump weighed in quickly, too.
Immediately. Blamed the far left directly, announced plans to designate Antifa a terrorist organization. His reasoning was explicit. He argued most recent political violence targeted conservatives from the radical left, so this move was necessary.
But at the exact same time, the counter-narrative deployed. The one critic started calling the Blue Anon theory.
Right. Influential media figures, network hosts, including Jimmy Kimmel, the late night, they pushed hard on the idea that the shooter was actually far-right.
A Maggie Trump supporter.
Yeah.
Or a groper.
Yeah, seizing on those alt-right meme references, essentially ignoring or deliberately downplaying the Antifa links and the personal leftist statements from the family.
Just to clarify for listeners, Blue Anon, that's a term the right uses, often pejoratively, for what they see as left-wing conspiracy theories pushed for political gain.
Correct. And Kimmel really leaned into the Groyper Fuentes angle.
What exactly did he say on his show?
He suggested, quote, the MAGA gang was desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them. This attempt to control the narrative, to minimize the left-wing evidence, it had immediate major consequences for her profession.
Right. The price of narrative control. It got steep fast.
It really did. Jimmy Kimmel's late night show, In Depth, by Next Star Media, the company owning the local affiliate that aired it.
And their reasoning.
Next Star issued a statement saying they strongly object to his comments blaming the murder on the magic. They essentially called it misinformation.
Wow. Cancellation. That triggered a huge reaction, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. Widespread liberal meltdown, you could call it. Public figures, groups demanding boycotts of Disney ABC's owner, claiming it was a violation of Kimmel's free speech, that he was just offering political opinion.
But on the other side,
many conservatives cheered it, saw it as, finally, accountability for what they called major media propagandists spreading blatant lies on TV. Lies designed, they argue, to deliberately hide the assassin's likely ideology. It became this huge flashpoint over media credibility.
It's fascinating and maybe useful to step back and think about the root of this violence, not just the who, but the why. Sources pointed to a specific mindset, this consequentialist ethos, particularly on the far left.
Yeah, this is probably the most crucial concept to really get our heads around. When we talk about a consequentialist ethos, we mean an ethical framework where you judge if an action is right or wrong based only on its outcome, its consequence.
Not on the action itself.
Right. That would be more deontological. Some actions are just wrong, regardless of outcome. Consequentialism says the ends can justify the means. Politically, if you believe the outcome is good enough, the action taken to achieve it becomes okay.
So, how does that connect to violence against someone like Charlie Kirk? How does that thinking work?
It basically creates a permission structure in people's minds. If you constantly label someone's speech as hate, bigotry, fascism, and remember those exact kinds of labels were reportedly on the bullet casings,
right?
Then you start to see that speech not just as words, but as something that causes real, negative, harmful societal consequences.
Okay. So the logic becomes Kirk's words cause harm. Therefore, stopping him, even violently, isn't necessarily evil. It's rationalized as a way to prevent those negative consequences. Yeah. Maybe even seen as self-defense against hate speech.
Exactly. When you internalize that idea that opposing speech is violence, then actual physical violence can start to seem like a proportionate, even justifiable.
And that completely eats away at the foundation of free speech, which relies on the idea that disagreement, however sharp, stays in the realm of words.
Fundamentally, free speech requires that words, however hateful you find them, are answered with more words, not with violence. This consequentialist thinking bypasses that entirely.
And we saw that same thinking, that same justification, not just in the act itself, but in the reactions after, which brings us to the, frankly, shocking celebrations and the intense dehumanization of Kirk online.
The celebrations were chillingly widespread. It shows just how deep this consequentialist logic might run. After the murder, numerous individuals on the left, including people working in high-profile places like the video Blizzard, Sucker Punch, Bethesda,
Major companies,
employees celebrated Kirk's death openly.
and the language they used. It wasn't just political disagreement.
No, it was vile, dehumanizing, phrases like happy goodbye, celebrating, comparing him to a disease, calling him a cancer that had been erratic.
I saw one reference to a 360 no-scope.
Yeah, that's a video game term. It refers to doing a flashy, difficult kill shot, and using that term for a real-life assassination is incredibly cowardly.
And they often tried to justify it, didn't they?
Frequent. By labeling Kirk a fascist, bigot, arguing he deserved what happened because of his views on abortion or gender roles or whatever. This profound lack of empathy, seeing a political opponent not as a person, but as, like, a disease or an existential threat. Sources argue that's the necessary step before.
That constant demonization, stripping away their humanity, it creates that permission structure we talked about. You can only celebrate someone's murder if you stop seeing them as human first.
Precisely. And that pattern, justify the killing by demonizing the victim, is why the public backlash was so huge. But, though celebrating, they weren't immune to consequences either. We saw what some sources called the accountability wave, or maybe counter-cancel culture.
Yeah, describe that. It seemed like a grassroots thing initially.
It was. Massive effort. People online started compiling screenshots of all these celebratory posts from game developers, journalists, activists, and they sent them to the employers.
And the results.
A wave of mass firing across multiple industries.
Companies like Microsoft.
Right. Microsoft owns Blizzard and Bethesda now. Sucker Punch, The Washington Post. They fired employees very quickly. Put out statements saying comments celebrating violence were unacceptable, didn't align with corporate values.
There's a dark irony there, isn't there?
A huge iron. Many of the people celebrating the assassination or defending those who did were the same voices who had championed cancel culture, cheering when people lost jobs over old jokes or awkward phrasing, expressing conservative views. They helped build the system where corporate power enforces ideological conformity.
And then when the precedent they helped set was applied to them,
suddenly they cried free speech. They complained about being fired for celebrating a political murder, but the companies were just applying the rules these activists had effectively established. The hypocrisy was pretty stark and impossible for many to ignore. Celebrating assassination just crosses a line far beyond a bad.
Okay, stepping back from the immediate fallout, how is Kirk's death being seen now by his own move, by his followers?
Overwhelmingly, it's viewed as exactly that assassin's veto we meant, a direct attack on the core value of settling differences with words. Supporters see him as a martyr.
And they argue the violence will back.
Yeah, that it serves as a powerful motive, a call to act. His widow, Erica, as we said, confirmed the move. TPUSA events like AmericaFest, they're not just continuing, they're expanding. The message from leaders was clear. Don't cower. Get louder. Fight harder. Channel the anger into action. Silencing Kirk, they argue, only amplified his message.
This whole tragedy, it's such a stark reflection of the political conflict in the U.S., right? Especially around the value of human life, the willingness to engage civilly. And you found a source that really highlights this contrast, looking outside the U.S. political bubble.
Yeah, there's a really powerful moving account that helps frame. To really grasp the depth of the dehumanization we saw in some of the U.S. reactions, it's worth reflecting on a different perspective on the value. It comes from the experience of Svika, the father of an Israeli hostage named Eat. It serves as a kind of mirror.
Tell us about Eaton.
Svika shared this harrowing story. His son, Eat, was a combat soldier, but on October 7th, he was working as a security guard at the Noah Fest. When the attack happened, chaos erupted, people fled. But Eaton chose to stay. He acted as a protector, saved dozens of people's lives. He was eventually kidnapped, apparently by civilians from Gaza, not Hamas fighters.
And Svika shared a
heart-wrenching. Eaton and another guard found 2 injured. Both had been assaulted, raped, murdered, but one was still breathing. Eaton didn't run. He picked her up, carried her on his shoulders, running desperately through the attack, trying to get her to safety. She ultimately died, but he risked everything trying to save her, trying to protect the defenseless.
That commitment to life.
It seems deeply ingrained. Svika talked about how his family teaches their 8 children that the state of Israel, their collectance, their...
And there was something Eaton himself had said.
Yeah.
That connects back to this idea of consequentialism versus something else.
Yeah, this is the profoundly powerful contrast. Eaton had specifically told his parents beforehand, if he was ever kidnapped while serving as a soldier, he forbade them from agreeing to release convicted terrorists and back.
He forbade them.
Why? He believed releasing terrorists to save his own life would inevitably lead to more innocent Israelis being killed later by those same terrorists. It's the staggering sense of collective response, a kind of deontological commit, a duty to the lives of strangers, prioritizing the greater safety of his people over his own survival.
That is A world away from celebrating someone's death online because you disagree with their politics.
An absolute world away. It stands in such stark contrast to the casual dehumanization, the open celebration of political assassination we saw from some corners in the U.S. discourse after Kirk's death. It forces you to confront just how warped the value system has become for certain extremist facts, when death is seen as a tool, or a single human life is viewed as disposable collateral damage in an ideological war.
That depth of contrast, preserving life for the collective versus celebrating death for political points, that might be the starkest takeaway when you put these sources side by side.
It really underscores the stakes.
So, wrapping this up, what does it all mean? This deep dive into Charlie Kirk's assassination, it's not just about one violent act, is it? It feels like a mirror, reflecting this intense, maybe even self-destructive, polarization gripping society, the fragility of the whole system.
I think that's right. The sources really confirm that when you mix political extremism, which gets amplified like crazy in online echo chambers, with this corrosive consequentialist logic we discussed, well, you create an environment where words eventually escalate into into reality.
When you constantly label opponents as fascists, bigots, Nazis, labels that, again, were reportedly found on the ammunition.
You provide that permission structure for violence. You imply that extreme measures aren't just possible, they might even be justified.
And the reaction that intense media war over the motive, the rush to assign blame, the counter-cancel culture crackdown, it all just shows how incredibly fragile the foundations of civil discourse really are, right? The big question is, where do we go from here?
We've seen how amplifying extreme views online builds this tribal script. Every issue becomes a kind of holy war. And this erosion of civil discourse, it threatens our basic ability to coexist, to govern ourselves through talking, through dialogue. So given that reality, we have to ask, what responsibility do you have? You, the average person participating in online culture.
What's your role in resisting that algorithmic amplification and making sure words stay the main tool, the only legitimate tool for change?
What specific actions can you take, maybe starting today, to prevent your own corner of the internet, your own interactions, from contributing to that dehumanization, from helping create those permission structures for violence, even unintentional?
Something to really think about, the weighty responsibility of discourse itself.
We are tackling a really difficult, incredibly charged topic.
Absolutely. It's essential, though.
We're doing an exploration into the stack of sources surrounding the assassination of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk. This happened at a university in Utah.
And it wasn't just, a personal tragedy, although it certainly was that. It immediately became this political earthquake.
Yeah, a shockwave that just instantly rippled out, exposing some really deep fissures in American political.
It's crucial because the event moves so fast, almost instantly from, a crime scene investigation into this huge battle for narrative control.
Totally.
And our sources, they cover an immense range. We're talking everything from, deeply moving eulogies, narratives of martyrdom,
right,
all the way through these really polarized debates on the shooter's motives, and then this almost unprecedented media accountability moment, the Kimmel incident, as we're calling it.
Exact. So our mission here is to try cut through some of that noise. We want to give you the clearest, most detailed look we possibly can at the cultural earthquake that followed. We're going to look at how Kirk's death is being framed, really cemented as this moment of martyrdom, maybe even an awakening for young.
And we'll have to analyze that conflicting evidence around the attacker's ideology, what was really going on.
Yes, and dive deep into that fascinating irony, the whole Kimmel situation, where you have a powerful media figure facing consequences, driven by the very cultural tools his side often criticized.
It's a complex web.
Okay, so let's start by unpacking Charlie Kirk himself. The legacy he built up really quite quickly.
Yeah, it's striking.
The sources, they consistently describe him as a really crucial voice of a generation, and they specifically note he refused to give up on Gen Z politically.
Long before others in his movement really saw their potential, apparently.
Exactly. That seems to be a key point.
And the word that just keeps coming up again and again in these sources, it's courage. His whole style of activism, it was described as, non-confrontational in person, but intensely provocative ideology.
Right. That image you see referenced repeatedly, Kirk sitting under a simple tent, college campus, often surrounded by huge, openly hostile crowds.
And just that simple banner, prove me wrong, 3 words.
That setting, I think it's really crucial for understanding the political culture he was operating in. These weren't like quiet academic debates.
No, not at all. We have source accounts describing describing the atmosphere. Student hyperventilating with fury.
Ah!
Descriptions like delirious anger scribbled across their dilated pupils. People shouting him down, often just pure invective, not even questions.
And students would try to get him banned, petitioning administrators and so on.
That was the environment he chose. And what the sources really stressed is that Kirk, he never gave the anger back. He stayed calm.
Patiently listening, trying to debate, even when faced with, well, a diatribe.
Right. And this consistent composure, facing that kind of hostility, it wasn't just about looking good. It was described as deeply infectious.
How so?
Well, think about it. For students who maybe held different views, who sources say often felt pressured to stay silent or just parrot the, quote, woke orthodox.
Okay.
Seeing Kirk stand his ground without losing his temper, it apparently gave them this real, tangible sense of empowerment. It was courage in action, not just talked about.
That makes sense. And this connects right into the core of his message, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
He was politically active, obviously, but his primary focus, as the sources frame it, was this return to, let's say, foundational principles.
He wanted to be remembered for his faith and his courage, prioritizing God, family, and nation. That comes through loud and clear.
But what made him so effective politically, especially with younger people, seems to be how populist his actual policy platform was.
Yes, that synthesis of his policy positions is really interesting. It kind of challenges the standard left-right boxes.
What were the core points?
The sources list things like fighting against big institutional buyers, like BlackRock, who are buying up single-family homes.
Okay, housing affordability.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Pushing for affordable housing in general, standing firm against the Chinese Communist Party's economic influence.
Right.
And advocating for policies that lead to cheaper gas, kitchen table.
And here's where it gets really that policy crossover aspect.
Yeah.
Sources explicitly say that these populist points, fighting corporate power, wanting a more accessible quality of life, they're so broadly appealing that, quote, Bernie bros would endorse every word of it.
Which is quite a statement.
Wow.
It suggests Kirk really tapped into generational frustrations that maybe go beyond traditional conservative identity politics.
He spoke to their material concerns, it sounds like.
And that resonance, that success, according to his supporters, is what made him such a target.
How do they connect those dots?
Well, they argue that this successful, popular, nonviolent challenge to the dominant campus ethos is precisely what ultimately led to the violence against.
So they contrast his open debate style with the environment they say was created by the woke mob.
Exactly. An environment they describe as the judge, the jury, and the executioner of what's acceptable to say or think. Very intolerant.
So the assassination in this narrative from the sources, it's framed as more than just a political tragedy, the ultimate escalation of that intolerance.
Right. The idea being, if you can't beat someone's logic or views with your own,
you resort to murder.
Yeah. One commentator asked this really chilling question that sums up that fear. Are we now a country where if we can't defeat your views and your logic with ours, then we shoot you? And this framing, it immediately propelled the aftermath into becoming a kind of cultural movement.
His death viewed not as an end, but as a catalyst.
Exactly. A catalyst for what his supporters are calling a mighty move of the Spirit of God and a great awakening, particularly among the young people he focused.
Is there evidence of this impact cited?
Oh, overwhelmingly, according to them. And it's described as visceral, spontaneous, not just top-down political organization. Reports of spontaneous high school vigils popping up in unexpected places, like Washington State.
Yeah.
Huge, peaceful demonstrations in Beverly Hills, all places, and large signs saying, "Long live Charlie Kirk," just appearing autonomously at college football tailgates.
So grassroots stuff.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And this fear his opponents apparently had of his influence, it seems backed up by some data cited. A national survey mentioned in the sources, looking at TikTok users under 30 who voted for Trump.
Okay.
It found they trusted Charlie Kirk more than any other single individual, more than politicians, more than other media figures.
That's significant.
And the sources conclude that his death forced millions of young people to confront these big existential questions. What do I actually believe in?
And maybe feeling empowered to speak up.
Yes, empowered to speak their mind and maybe even turn towards faith. So that narrative of martyrdom is actively driving engagement, both political and spiritual, among his followers.
Okay, let's shift gears now. This is where it gets incredibly murky and very contested. The details around the shooter's identity, Tyler Robinson, and the whole political battle over his motive.
Yeah, this immediately became ground zero for the narrative war. Robinson, 22 years old.
And the common narrative that solidified pretty quickly among conservative commentators, and initially seemed supported by comments from Utah Governor Spencer Cox,
was that Robinson was radicalized by leftist ideology and gender ideology. That was the line.
And they point to specific evidence, not just generalization.
Right. They point to evidence released through the charging document. Very specific things.
What kind of specifics?
It comes from direct communication. Robinson's text message. They apparently revealed this intimate relationship with a transitioning roommate.
Okay.
Robinson repeatedly called this roommate my love in the texts.
Okay.
And the sources quote the alleged motive directly from those messages.
What did they say?
Robinson stated, I had enough of his hatred, referring to Kirk. And then, crucially, my reason for doing this is to protect you, protecting the roommate.
So the argument is that evidence points directly away from him being, say, a MAGA supporter.
Exactly. According to these sources, this evidence immediately undercut attempts by some media figures and commentators to paint him differently.
What were the counter-narratives they...
Things like the shooter being a groper or some kind of far-right MAGA extremist or maybe a fan of someone like Nick Fuentes.
Okay.
These sources say that's explicitly rejected because Robinson himself, in his text, called Kirk a fascist.
Right.
And he clearly expressed this motive of protecting someone within a gender ideology-related context that strongly argues against him being a right-wing fan of Kirk or his...
And the media coverage around this specific ideological thread, that drew a lot of fire, didn't it?
Immense backlash. Sources specifically call out an ABC News reporter, Matt Gutman, for how he handled the reporting on the shooter's relationship with the roommate.
And this caused real outrage.
The criticism was absolutely scathing. Sources accuse Gutman of essentially glorifying the killer.
How so?
By finding the intimate details of the relationship. The romantic dynamics with the roommate thrilling and touching, even when the network knew about the anti-conservative political violence that had just happened.
Wow, that framing didn't land well.
Not at all. It was quickly labeled by many sources as a deeply perverse attempt at emotional manipulation.
Strong word.
Some commentators went even further, characterizing that coverage as almost an implicit incitement of LGBT terrorism, arguing the media seemed more interested in sentimentalizing the killer's life than condemning the political violence.
And the sense of threat, it wasn't just among commentators, right? It went higher up.
Yes, it escalated very quickly to the highest levels of government. We saw an almost unheard-of response from federal security. In the immediate aftermath, the Secret Service started providing protection to the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt.
That's unusual, highly unusual.
The Secret Service usually protects the president, VP, immediate family, maybe a few other very senior officials. Almost never a press secretary unless there's a major specific threat.
Was there precedent?
Sources compared it to the temporary protection given to Sarah Huckabee Sanders back in 2018, but it's rare.
So what does that signal?
It just underscores how severely this assassination raised the perceived threat level. Fears about the safety of high-profile government figures out in public. It suggests this act of political violence was seen as a genuine, immediate, potentially escalating threat to American leadership itself.
And speaking of escalation, let's go straight to the Kimmel, because this was a really dramatic meeting, unfolded almost...
Yeah, and it created one of the most, fascinating examples of this cancel culture warfare we've seen play out.
What was the trigger, the flashpoint?
It was Jimmy Kimmel's disputed claim about the shooter's motives, right after those text messages emerged, showing the ideological conflict. Kimmel went on his show and falsely claimed that the MAGA gang was working overtime to convince us that Tyler Robinson wasn't MAGA as well.
Despite the evidence pointing the other way.
Exact. Sources argue this was a blatant attempt to just willfully misrepresent the clear ideological motivation presented by the evidence, the anti-fascist, leftist, gender ideology-related sentiments, trying to shift the blame.
And the reaction.
Universally condemned in the sources we looked at. Not just misinformation, but a blatant lie.
Yeah.
Part of a larger alleged pattern of news distortion.
But what's really kind of unprecedented here is how quickly he faced serious professional consequences and the mechanism.
That's the core of the deep dive here, isn't it? It wasn't just, say, Disney ABC making an internal call. It involved government regulation, corporate fear, a multi-layered thing.
Walk us through that. How did it unfold?
Okay, first, the FCC chairman, Brendan Carr, publicly weighed in. Now, he didn't order the firing or anything like that, but he publicly questioned whether the licensed local broadcasters, the TV stations that carry ABC programming across the country, risked major fines or even losing their licenses if they continued to run Kimmel's content.
Why?
Because of the accusations of spreading, quote, brazenly false information regarding a national tragedy. Broadcasters have certain public interest obligations under their license.
So that threat from the FCC, that was the catalyst.
It seems to have been the main trigger, yes.
Right.
We're talking about local affiliates everywhere. The sources point out a major broadcast group, Nexstar, they cover something like 15 million U.S. households.
Okay, big play.
Huge. They apparently decided to pull the plug on Kimmel's show on their local stations first.
Before Disney ABC even made an official move.
Reportedly, yes.
Yeah.
This massive defection happened before the network made a public announcement about pulling the show.
Wow. So it shows the power of that regulatory scrutiny combined with, I guess, public pressure.
And consumer pressure, yeah. The sources also suggest Kimmel's show was already kind of struggling with ratings. Worse ratings than even Colbert, is one quote. So this perfect storm, the legal liability risk, the public outrage, maybe weak rating, gave his corporate bosses the justification they needed. One source suggests they jumped on firing you while they can still pass off the blame on everybody else.
Okay, and this is where the whole cancel culture paradox just explodes, right?
Absolutely. Because the political left, sympathetic media figures, they immediately framed Kimmel's removal as this profound attack on the First Amendment.
An assault on freedom of speech.
Right, suggesting this was proof that Trump and his allies were building a censorship state to control the narrative.
But the conservative response?
According to the sources, it was this mix of, well, undisguised glee and a very strategic application of power.
How did they counter the First Amendment argument?
Their argument was sharp. This isn't a First Amendment issue at all. The First Amendment protects you from the government censoring your speech. This, they argued, was justified economic pressure. Private employers firing an employee for spreading damaging, brazenly false information during a national tragedy.
And they pointed out the irony, didn't they?
Oh, massive. Citing figures who had celebrated when someone like Tucker Carlson was fired by Fox, now suddenly panicking when one of their own faced similar corporate economic consequences.
So the sources suggest this was a conscious move by the right. Use the same...
It seems so. One source put the conservative position bluntly. You built this system, and now we're using it for just purpose.
Meaning?
The argument being made was that the conservative movement needed to get comfortable not just having power, but feeling justified in wielding it the same way that the left has and does.
So the Kimmel firing was seen as a major symbolic...
Huge. Demonstrating that accountability, or cancel culture, depending on your view, could now flow in both directions.
But the accountability push, it went way beyond just Kimmel.
Oh, yeah. The sources indicate that for many commentators, the most disgusting part of the whole tragedy was the sheer volume of, well, unbelievably vile remarks. Online, yeah. Open, public celebrations of Kirk's murder, posted by people described as just normal left-wing.
And that prompted a response.
The major response. A massive firing operation, as one source called it, was launched, aimed at collecting thousands of these celebratory comments.
Into what? A database?
Into a searchable database, yeah. The stated goal was to facilitate professional consequence, the argument being that celebrating murder crosses a line that deserves zero tolerance in any workplace.
And did this lead to actual people losing jobs?
A very real professional fallout.
Yeah.
The sources cited several high-profile examples to illustrate the power of this collective action.
Such as?
A senior developer at Sucker Punch Productions, they make the big video games, Ghost of Tsushima, and they had Ghost of Yoda upcoming.
Right. Popular studio.
Very. This developer was called out publicly for celebrating the murder, which immediately led to calls for boycotts of the studio's game.
Wow. Any other examples?
Yeah, documented cases across different fields. A dean of students in Virginia apparently commented online, "Charlie Kirk, you reap what you sow," publicly called out.
Okay.
A teacher in Florida was immediately suspended for saying America became greater today because Kirk died.
Jeez.
And a real estate agent was apparently fired swiftly by two different employers back-to-back for comments condoning the assassin.
So this whole operation, while some might see it as just more culture war escalation...
It was framed by conservative commentators as absolutely necessary for public safety, for moral integrity.
They drew a line.
A very clear line, repeatedly emphasized in the sources. Disagreeing with someone's beliefs, even finding them objectionable, that's one thing.
But celebrating murder.
But celebrating the death of another human being, especially someone who was a husband and a father, that was deemed an unforgivable offense, warranting immediate termination. The database was seen as a defense mechanism against people making direct calls to violence or celebrating it when it happened.
Okay, now we have to address something else that popped. This unexpected, really controversial internal that erupted within the conservative movement itself right after the assassination.
Yeah, this was mess. The conspiracy theory suggesting Charlie Kirk was killed because he was supposedly shifting his position on Israel.
A really painful moment of division, sources say, right when many felt the movement.
And it involves some very influential figures, people like Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson. They were accused of deliberately trying to politicize Kirk's death.
How? By suggesting he was killed because he was moving away from his very staunch pro-stance.
Exactly. That was the core of the conspiracy theory they were accused of pushing.
Let's get specific. What were their actual claims, according to...
Okay. Owens claimed Kirk was having a kind of spiritual transformation regarding Israel.
Meaning what?
suggesting his new alignment with what she termed true Christianity, maybe a less overtly Zionist interpretation, put him in conflict with powerful pro-Zionists in America, implying they might be involved.
And Tucker
Carlson claimed Kirk resented Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu using the U.S. to prosecute his war, that Kirk found this dynamic shameful and embarrassing for America.
Okay, so those were the claims. How were they received?
Swiftly and aggressively countered by other conservative sources who called the theory things like demonic, anti-Semitic, and based on sloppy and shallow thinking.
Did they offer counter-evidence?
Yeah, quite detailed evidence to refute the idea Kirk had actually abandoned his position. For instance, sources cite Bill Ackman, the billionaire investor.
What was his connection?
He apparently convened a really crucial meeting with Kirk shortly before his death, and the detailed account of that meeting paints a very different picture. It shows Kirk wasn't announcing some big change in his own position. He was engaging with a complex issue within his movement. He was reportedly concerned that young conservatives were, quote, getting tired of defending Israel. So to address, he organized this two-day session, brought together about 35 conservative influencers. The goal wasn't to pivot his own stand, but to foster an open debate, get a sense of how the younger generation felt, and figure out how to engage the topic effect. Exploration, not abandon.
And critics of the conspiracy theory pointed to his public record, too.
Yes, his long-standing public record. They noted he consistently used terms like supporting Judea and Samaria, which is a very strong Zionist language.
Right.
They also highlighted the fact that his very last major interview was with Ben Shapiro, whom one commentator rather pointedly called the biggest Jew of them all.
As proof of his continued engagement and solidarity within that.
Exactly. Proof he hadn't suddenly flipped.
So the critical takeaway from those sources dismissing the theory
was that this whole internal fight was a massive, destructive distraction. A cynical attempt, they argued, to inject division into the conservative movement precisely when it needed unity.
Unity to honor his actual legacy.
His legacy of faith and courage. The consensus among those critics was that the conspiracy theory minimized the real gravity of the political violence they attributed to leftist ideology and shifted the blame onto a totally unsubstantiated internal conflict. So if we try to synthesize this whole deep dive, what really emerges is that Charlie Kirk's assassination wasn't just this immense personal tragedy. It acted like a high-powered lens,
exposing these profound, really dangerous fissures running right across American culture.
Yeah. We've seen a public safety crisis serious enough to trigger Secret Service action for press secretary.
We saw that unprecedented media reckoning with Kimmel.
And the highly ironic escalation of ideological warfare using the very tools of cancel culture that one side often decries.
And the warning that echoes throughout these sources, the really critical lesson they seem to be drawing,
is the inherent danger of dehumanization. It comes up again and again.
That rhetoric used by some political figures calling opponents fascists or saying they don't belong in my fucking country.
That kind of language is repeatedly, explicitly linked in these sources to the real-world violence that ultimately took Kirk's life. The emphasis is clear. When you start reducing the other side to a non-human threat, violence becomes thinkable, maybe even inevitable.
And the distinction in the responses afterward is just stark. Really unsettling.
It provides the final contrast, doesn't it? On one side, Kirk supporters, their response framed in terms of prayer, spontaneous vigils, accelerated nonviolent activism, leading to what they call a spiritual and political awakening.
While on the other side, among his detractors, the response included, celebrating his murder online.
And utilizing intense corporate and social pressure of those databases, the firing operations to purge individuals deemed unacceptable for their comments.
It leaves the whole country in this incredibly challenging. Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, our listeners.
Yeah, something to really mull over.
In a nation where political rhetoric has become so weaponized that violence isn't just committed, but in some quarters it's normalized, even celebrated.
And where the responses to that violence are so fundamentally opposed, prayer and activism on one side versus celebration and professional purging on the other.
What is the sustainable path forward for any kind of national discourse? How much longer can America really hold together without finding some kind of common focal point for basic unity, or at least mutual tolerance?
We are undertaking, an essential, but I have to say, a deeply difficult deep dive.
Yes.
We are tackling a complex stack of sources detailing one of the most serious and, frankly, divisive events in recent political history.
Yeah.
The assassination of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk.
It is a profound subject, absolutely. Yes. And our goal here, for you, the listener, is to maintain complete objectivity as we synthesize these narratives.
Exactly.
We've got sources ranging from, initial police reports, courtroom documents, all the way to partisan commentary, behavioral analysis, institutional response. It's a lot.
It really is.
And our mission, just to be clear, is isn't to endorse any single political viewpoint, not at all. It's about cutting through the immense ideological noise to try and understand the complex, often contradictory reactions, and importantly, the lasting, maybe even fundamental implications this event has had on America.
That's right on. The immediate shock of the tragedy was, well, horrific.
Yeah.
But what unfolded afterwards really exposed a deep, dangerous, and you could say structural fracture in our political landscape. So we are going to analyze the facts, the rhetoric, and some pretty stunning consequences, starting right at the moment the event occurred.
Okay, let's start by establishing the verifiable facts of the incident itself. The assassination happened during a speaking engagement at Utah Valley University, just UVU.
Right.
The sources are quite specific. Charlie Kirk was shot in the neck. And this happened while he was actively fielding a question from the audience.
And the question was about?
It was about mass shootings and what he frequently termed the trans agenda. So right in the middle of discussing those topics.
Wow. Okay. And the immediate reaction, you mentioned some initial unity.
Yeah, initially it demonstrated a rare moment maybe of political unity and mourning. The sources note the shock was palpable. It really did cross the political aisle at first.
We saw names like Barack Obama, Joe Biden.
Exactly. High-profile figures from the left, Obama, Biden, even late-night host Jimmy Kimmel were sending condolences, prayers to the Kirk family.
Acknowledging the gravity of it all.
Yes, acknowledging the sheer gravity of a public figure being targeted and assassinated, regardless of politics.
But that initial sympathy, it seemed to shift pretty quickly into something else, right? Like a massive show of support from his base.
Oh, absolutely. That initial wave translated into a huge public display of support. The memorial service in Glendale, Arizona, it was a massive logistical event.
Huge turnout, I heard.
Reports indicate the venue hit capacity. Estimates put it around 200,000 attendees. People lining up hours before dawn to get inside.
200,000 people, that's staggering.
It really is. It marked an immediate sort of elevation of Kirk's status among his supporters.
And his widow, Erica Kirk, she played a central role.
Yes. Central to that service was his widow, Erica. Her speech there was powerful, widely publicized.
And she later became CEO of TPUSA.
That's right. She was later named CEO of Turning Point USA, TPUSA. It showed the movement's immediate decision to kind of unify and push forward with its mission after the tragedy.
Okay, so let's shift to the investigation. The alleged killer.
Right, moving to that critical phase. The alleged killer was identified as 22-year-old Tyler James Robinson.
Now, initially he wasn't caught right away.
No, initially the FBI released images just of a person of interest. They noted the individual appears to be of college age.
And they labeled it targeted pretty quickly.
Yes, they confirmed quickly that, in their estimation, it was a targeted event.
But the capture itself was interesting, not a huge manhunt.
No, and that's fascinating. Robinson, who sources say was a student accepted to Utah State University, he was ultimately turned in by his own father.
His father?
After confessing the crime. That detail really underscores the sudden, shocking nature of the crime, even within his own family.
So the physical evidence.
Yeah.
What did investigators find?
The physical evidence quickly cemented the political motivation aspect. They covered the weapon used, a bolt-action rifle.
Where was it found?
It was wrapped in a dark towel located near the UVU camp.
Okay. And this evidence, combined with the charges, that changed things legally.
Fundamentally, it altered the legal nature of the case from, say, a random homicide to something far more serious, far more...
That charging detail, the victim targeting enhancement, that seems crucial.
Absolutely vital. This is where the legal system formally acknowledges the ideological dimension. The Utah County District Attorney explicitly read the official charge, including that specific enhancement.
And what does that enhancement actually mean, legally speaking?
It means the prosecution is arguing, and the charge reflects, that Robinson intentionally selected Charlie Kirk because of his belief or perception regarding Charlie Kirk's political expression.
So it writes the motive directly into the legal framework.
Precisely. It legally formalizes the ideological motivation in the court record. It forces the system to grapple with this as an act of calculated political violence.
Which is a major step beyond just a typical homicide charge.
Huge. It focuses not just on the act, but the why behind it, the ideology. A major consequential shift.
And if the motive was ideological, did the physical evidence back that up? Did it have, like, fingerprints of that ideology?
A very clear fingerprint, yes. Sources detail that ammunition casings recovered at the scene, they were reportedly engraved.
Engraved? With what?
With specific political transgender anti-fascist ideology.
Wow. Okay, that's direct.
Incredibly direct. And perhaps even more strikingly, the phrase Bella Ciao.
Bella Ciao, what's that?
Sources suggest Bella Ciao, roughly translated, is a reference to a historic 20th century Italian anti-fascist resistance song and move. Bella Ciao, actually.
So an undeniable link?
An undeniable, clear ideological fingerprint right there on the killer's weapon, linking the act directly to specific political options.
And the family confirmed this?
Yes. Robinson's family confirmed to investigators that he had, in fact, made these specific engravings himself.
Okay, this leads us into the digital evidence, the text messages. This part gets really interesting, doesn't it? Because it moves into behavioral analysis.
It does. The DA released text messages between Robinson and his roommate boyfriend, who identifies as trans.
And what did they show?
One text showed Robinson relaying a note he'd apparently written. I had the opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk, and I'm going to take...
Just laid out like that.
Pretty much. And the conversation continued in a similar vein. Robinson later texting things like, I had enough of his hatred, some hate can't be negotiated out.
And referencing his roommate.
Yeah, affectionately referencing my love when speaking to his roommate. This is the core evidence the prosecution is using to establish premeditation and motive.
And how did Robinson appear in court? What did the behavioral analysts say?
Analysts cited in the sources focused heavily on his court demeanor. They described him as generally stoic, but noted a subtle yet distinct nod when the judge specifically mentioned the political motivation, the targeting enhancement.
A nod, really. Apparently. And this contrasted sharply with his alleged lack of emotional reaction when other sort of peripheral charges were brought up in the proceedings.
But there's controversy around those texts, too.
Right.
Some analysts question them.
Yes, a significant debate arose, especially among online analysts. They questioned the authenticity of the language used, suggesting the exchange might have been, and this is, quote, fabricated theater.
Fabricated theater. Why? What seemed unnatural?
They pointed to certain terms. Robinson used phrases like drop point, my old man, and how quickly he apparently used the word interrogated to describe police questioning.
So they thought it sounded scripted.
Exactly. Too precise, almost cinematic. They felt it was unnatural, overly expository for just a casual text exchange between partners.
That's a huge leap, though. Claiming a panicked 22-year-old is crafting some kind of legal narrative in text. Did the analyst offer specific proof? Well, proof is maybe too strong a word. It's analysis, right? Their argument is that the language mirrors legal disclosure closely.
Okay.
The theory or speculation is that this maybe meticulously crafted exchange was intended to achieve two things simultaneously. Establish a clear narrative of premeditation by Robinson alone,
right,
while also clearly communicating the roommate's innocence. If the texts explicitly confirm the plan and Robinson's singular intent, it helps shield the roommate from accusations of being an accomplice.
So were they real, spontaneous texts or a calculated message to protect his companion? That's the question hanging over them.
That is the profound question, yeah.
Okay, so once the immediate facts started coming out, the discourse,
yeah,
it just turned toxic almost instantly, didn't it? Moving from that initial brief sympathy to outright ideological warfare.
Almost instantly is right. We saw widespread, almost celebratory reactions online. Sources mention posts celebrating Kirk's death reached, quote, 500,000 likes.
500,000 likes for someone's death.
The sheer volume, the enthusiasm, it suggested to many observers that a really dangerous ideological line had been crossed.
Like the idea that murder is an acceptable response.
That a belief that, quote, the acceptable response to speech they don't like is murder had become normalized, or at least openly expressed, in certain online subcultures.
And this wasn't just anonymous trolls, right?
No, not at all. This extreme behavior wasn't confined to anonymous. Sources reported on a highly controversial incident involving staff at TMZ.
TMZ? What happened there?
Staff allegedly were heard cheering when the initial news of Kirk's death was announced in their newsroom.
Cheering? Seriously?
That was the allegation. TMZ later issued a public apology. They claimed the cheering was for an unrelated simultaneous car chase they were covering.
Okay.
But the controversy didn't die down. Online sleuths, using timestamps from broadcasts, created this very public, very heated debate about whether that explanation held water. Many remained suspicious.
And there were actual consequences for celebrating the violence, institutionally speaking.
Yes. And quite powerfully, we saw a strong demonstration of backlash at Texas State University. A student there was expelled.
Expelled for what?
For mocking the assassination at a campus vigil, specifically acting it out on a public stage.
Wow, vigil.
The university president, Dr. Kelly Damphouse, was very clear. He stated this act, quote, mock, trivializes, or promotes violence, and was completely against the institution's values.
So not just a minor penalty.
No, a clear institutional statement. Celebrating political violence carries severe, immediate educational consequences.
Did this scrutiny extend to professionals too? teachers?
It did. The Texas Education Agency launched investigations into multiple teachers and staff members for sharing what were described as reprehensible and inappropriate content about the murder on their personal social media.
So it confirms this reaction wasn't just online noise. It had real-world job repercussions.
Absolutely, for people working with kids especially.
Now, the political rhetoric immediately after accusations of defamation started flying, didn't they? Even against the deceased.
Right. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AO, faced specific accusations of defaming Kirk in her commentary right after the event.
How exactly did she supposedly defame? The sources must be specific on this.
They are. Critics pointed to her response when asked about bail reform related to the earlier Paul Pelosi. Instead of addressing that, she allegedly used the perceived hypocrisy of figures like Kirk to, quote, justify his assassination. That was the accusation. Furthermore, she was criticized for falsely claiming Kirk had accused Jews of controlling Hollywood colleges, etc.
Which critics saw as trying to slander him after his death.
Exactly, as attempts to retroactively paint him in a negative light, implying he somehow invited the violence upon himself.
And this wasn't isolated. Other public figures.
We saw similar rhetoric, yeah. Actress Amanda Seyfried faced criticism for describing Kirk simply as full.
Which again implicitly suggests.
Implicitly frames the narrative that he somehow brought the assassination upon himself.
And Representative Ilhan.
She faced intense scrutiny in Congress. She retweeted a video without adding any commentary that reportedly defamed Kirk and seemed to justify his murder.
And she didn't take it down.
No. When challenged, she refused to remove This led to accusations she was effectively endorsing the violent rhetoric through, deliberate inaction.
Okay, this feels like a turning point. The Jimmy Kimmel controversy. This is where the right started talking about cancel culture in reverse, right?
Exactly. Before all the facts about the shooter's motives were public, Kimmel made comments on his show characterizing the shooter as potentially MAGA or right.
Which turned out to be completely wrong.
Completely wrong. And once the actual political motivations, the left-wing anti-fascist engraving, the text became clear, the backlash against Kimmel was immediate and massive.
And it wasn't just online anger. There were institutional consequences.
Huge institutional fallout. Sources detail the response from Nexstar Media.
Who are they again?
They own hundreds of local ABC affiliates across the U.S. Massive leverage over ABC's national...
And what did they do?
Nexstar Media vowed to pull Jimmy Kimmel live from all their local stations, basically threatening to cripple the show's reach.
Forcing ABC's hand.
Absolutely. It wasn't just public pressure. It was a powerful corporate leverage play. ABC ultimately pulled the show in...
And conservative commentators saw this as
karma, or the arrival of the era of consequences they've been talking about.
Highlighting the hypocrisy.
Pointing out the deep hypocrisy. They argued the left had championed accountability culture for years, demanding immediate firing and deplatforming conservatives over controversy.
And now that same playbook was used against a liberal figure.
Exact. Demanding institutional accountability for polarized, and it worked. It achieved consequences previously seen mostly on the right.
This even drew in government figures, right? The FCC chairman.
Yes, the whole media dispute FCC chairman Brendan Carr publicly critiqued ABC's handling, specifically regarding Kimmel.
Which sparked another debate entirely.
It really did. A debate about irony and government over. Some sources argued Carr's public statement gave the left ammunition to cry foul, government censorship, chilling effect.
Others pointed out the
deep irony. Liberals had historically pushed for similar government intervention in media. Think about the long push for the Fairness Doctrine, which would regulate political balance.
So the right saw it as liberals suddenly championing free speech only when their own sides faced accountability.
That was the argument, yes. That they only discovered the importance of free speech when the accountability standards they championed were turned in.
Okay, before we move to the next section, we have to touch on the Candace Owen. Quite something.
It was highly scrutinized, yes. She publicly announced she would not attend.
And a reason?
It was controversial. She claimed she feared attending a public event which the feds are organizing.
Suggesting a conspiracy theory.
To many critics, yes. It sounded like a conspiracy theory right in the midst of a national tragedy. She then added she'd honor him privately by listening to Kanye West's song Power.
And the reaction to that?
Immediate criticism, accusations of grifting, of trying to monetize his murder, suggestions she was salty about not being invited or included as a speaker.
Or maybe the family asked her not to come.
That was speculated too, that perhaps the family had privately requested she stay away. Either way, it created this whole public drama that, frankly, distracted from the core. To really grasp the intensity of this fallout, we need to step back and contextualize Charlie Kirk's political philosophy. His stances were, the engine driving both the massive support and the profound animosity that allegedly fueled the assassination.
Right. His supporters saw him very differently than his critics.
Absolutely. Supporters viewed Kirk as a tireless champ. Free speech, traditional family values, faith. He was very vocal opposing gay marriage, for instance.
Based on traditional marriage argument.
Yeah. And he also opposed certain modern applications of the Civil Rights Act. His argument was that it was being misused, leveraged to enforce the trans agenda in schools and public life.
While his opponents saw him as
an extreme device. Someone who, they argued, consistently lied about and targeted marginalized communities. His rhetoric was often described as dangerously inflammatory by critics.
And the circumstances of his death, there's a tragic irony there, given his stance on guns.
A profound tragic irony. Kirk was a very staunch defender of the Second Amendment. He constantly used statistics to back up his pro-gun.
What kind of stats?
He'd often cite figures like over 250,000 defensive gun uses annually in the U.S. He'd contrast that with the 44,000 gun deaths.
Pointing out suicides and gang violence making up a large portion.
Exactly, noting nearly half were suicides, and maybe 85% of the rest involved gang violence. The irony, as his supporters pointed out, is that he was killed while literally addressing gun violence and mass.
Yet they believe he wouldn't have changed his stance.
They believe he would have still argued his pro-gun position was vindicated by the data, even in that moment.
Okay, so this assassination, it immediately kicked off serious talk about, well, what some sources explicitly call left-wing terrorism.
Yes. There's heavy critique in the source material that mainstream media consistently downplays or even refuses to classify violence coming from the left as terrorism.
Citing the Robinson case as an example.
As a key example within a larger, dangerous pattern, according to sources.
What other examples do they bring up to show this pattern?
They aggregate several recent incidents. They cite the attempted assassination of Justice Kavanaugh by an individual described as trans, the shooting at an ABC affiliate in Sacramento.
The one linked to Kimmel suspension.
Yes, allegedly by an angry leftist, specifically motivated by Kimmel being suspended, and an attack at a wedding where the perpetrator reportedly shouted, "Free Palestine."
So they're putting these together as evidence.
As evidence that political violence from the left isn't being categorized or discussed same violent right, a systematic underreporting.
And this criticism extends to official statistics on extremism.
It does. Sources actively dispute the commonly cited statistic that, say, 3/4 of political extremist violence originates from the right. They call that statistic propaganda.
Why propaganda? How do they argue it's skewed?
Their argument is that the statistic is deliberately skewed by intentionally excluding left-wing incident concepts.
I mean, what? What's being excluded?
Things like deaths occurring during BLM-related civil unrest or systematic actions by Antifa. This alleged exclusion, they argue, allows the media to effectively run defense for terrorism by painting an incomplete picture of ideological violence.
This whole ideological battle seems to circle back to one core concept, doesn't it? The idea that supposedly justified the murder in the killer's mind. Speech is violence.
That's critical to unpack, yes.
Yeah.
If you accept the premise that speech, particularly speech you deem hateful or divisive, isn't just offensive, but is actually an act of violence,
then the next step is?
Then the ideological leap is killing the person committing that speech violence can be framed within that specific framework as a legitimate act of self.
And sources see that normalization as incredibly dangerous.
As the driving force pushing America past a functional point of no return. This equation of words with physical harm.
The political divide after the assassination even showed up in Congress.
Yeah.
In a symbolic vote.
It did, quite starkly. A vote was held in the U.S. House of Representatives. The stated goal was to condemn the assassination and political violence more broadly. And here's where the politics got really messy.
Yeah.
The measure passed, eventually, but only after 58 Democrats voted against.
58 Democrats voted against condemning political violence.
That's how commentators on the right immediately framed it, questioning the depth of the divide, suggesting a segment of the Democratic Party wouldn't even take that basic step.
But wait, why would they oppose a simple condemnation of violence? Was there more to it? Nuance in the bill itself.
There was. The sources detail that the resolution was strategically worded by Republican leadership.
How so?
While the stated purpose was condemning violence, the specific language inside the motion highly politicized. It selectively targeted violence allegedly originating only.
So Democrats felt voting for it meant endorsing a partisan attack.
Exactly. Opposing Democrats argued that supporting the motion meant endorsing a politically weaponized resolution designed specifically to frame left-wing violence while conveniently ignoring right-wing extremism.
It put them in a tough spot.
An untenable position, they argue. Either look like you support violence or endorse what you see as a partisan message.
And this lack of common ground, even on condemning violence.
Oh.
That's why sources use that Bleeding Kansas comparison.
Precisely. Bleeding Kansas, referring to the pre-Civil War violence in Kansas that basically accelerated the conflict. This event is seen by some as a similar inflection.
Accelerating ideological conflict.
Suggesting an act of violence. For the polarization is so intense, polls cited in the material suggest 43% of Americans now believe Civil War is somewhat like in the next
43%. That highlights just how pervasive the fear and distrust have.
Despite the horror of the event, many supporters immediately began reframing Kirk's death, not just as a loss, but as a defining moment, a moment of profound power, basically an act of martyrdom.
A martyr for their cause.
Absolutely. Kirk's death is widely regarded within his movement as making him, quote, face of freedom, tire.
And that was reinforced by tributes.
Yes, reinforced by a surprisingly wide range of global vigils and tributes, seen everywhere from NASCAR and MLB games here in the U.S. to ceremonies held as far away as South.
So a global resonance in their view.
And sources suggest this tragedy will have measurable long-term political effects that could, quote, politically shock the world.
How so? By strengthening which group?
Specifically by strengthening the young male vote. The theory is that assassinating a young, outspoken male figure might galvanize that demographic.
Which historically leans which way?
Historically leans heavily Democrat, often 60-70%. The idea is this event could prompt a decisive shift among young men toward the right future elections.
And on a more personal level for supporters.
More fundamentally, many supporters reported feeling a newfound sense of courage.
Courage to do what?
After witnessing the extreme hostility and ultimately the price Kirk paid for speaking out, many expressed feeling emboldened, ready to speak openly about their own political beliefs without that previous fear of censorship or consequence.
And a turn towards faith as well.
Yes. For many, the tragedy also led to a significant renewed focus on faith Christianity. Some saw Kirk's death as, in a way, fulfilling his own prayer. God, use me.
Speaking of faith and courage, we really need to spend some time on his widow, Erica Kirk's response, especially at the memorial service. Her message seemed incredibly powerful.
It became one of the most powerful and widely discussed moments after the tragedy.
What was the core of it?
She delivered an incredibly strong message, really centered on Christian faith. She offered mercy and forgiveness to the accused killer, Tyler Robinson.
Forgiveness, directly.
Yes, specifically referencing the Bible. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
That's remarkable.
Her speech was widely contrasted by commentators with what they called the secular girl boss feminist attitude. Erica Kirk emphasized a traditional faith-based strength. She talked about redefining masculinity as fighting for something greater than yourself. God, children, country.
And commentators saw this as more impactful.
Commentators argued this raw, faith-driven strength resonated far more deeply than the perceived facade of modern secular power feminism. Some suggested the facade has ended when faced true tragedy.
She also shared something personal about their relationship, didn't she?
Yes, a deeply personal anecdote that really aimed to underscore the quality of their relationship and his character behind.
What was it?
She recalled that Charlie Kirk wrote her love notes every single Saturday. Without fail.
Every Saturday.
And every single note, she said, always ended by asking a profoundly humble question. Please let me know how I can better serve you as a husband.
Wow, that provides a very different picture.
A powerful counter. Countering the public caricature of him as just an aggressive political operative, highlighting a deep commitment to faith and personal service.
Okay, finally, let's look at the behavioral analysis side. How political violence like this can often backfire on the side that perpetrates it.
Yes, this is sometimes called the backfire principle. Behavioral analysts suggest humans have a strong, almost innate rejection of violence.
So seeing violence makes people recoil.
Exactly. And people who suffer a harsh initiation or witness an extreme tragedy aimed at silencing a group or viewpoint often end up assigning more value to the cause they suffered for or saw attacked.
So in Kirk's case,
the sheer horror of the violence might cause an instinctive recoil among people who are maybe opponents or just in the middle ground politically.
Meaning they might actually sympathize more with his side now?
Potentially. The immediate instinctive reaction might be sympathy or even finding agreement with his side simply because they abhor the violence used as a political weapon to silence.
So the goal of silencing him could have the opposite effect.
Precise. It might inadvertently strengthen his movement and push the middle ground away from the violent fringe associated.
And sources suggest this requires a bigger societal shift.
Yes, sources note that a fundamental shift is needed, moving past what they describe as Marxist-influenced ideas of group struggle, which they see really permeating segments of the modern.
And moving back towards
Individual responsibility and critical thinking. They are particularly critical of college.
calling
them, quote, a breeding ground for monsters, where this specific, dangerous, ideological justification speech as violence as self-defense is incubated and normalized.
Well, this deep dive has certainly been extensive, and it's exposed, I think, the sheer complexity and, frankly, the severity of the ideological divide in the United States today.
It really has. On one side, you have the clear narrative that this was the intentional silencing of a political figure, someone who, in their view, dared to speak truth to power.
And on the other side?
On the other, you see the narrative often used, critics say, to justify or excuse the act that the assassination was somehow the inevitable, maybe even deserved consequence of hateful, divisive rhetoric.
The key takeaway here, it seems, is that this whole incident exposed a really deep fracture, a point where the celebration of death itself became a political tool.
Yes, signaling a major cultural and ideological breakdown when that happened.
And this public celebration, this rhetoric, it led to immediate real-world consequences, not just for Kirk, but for others.
Absolutely. For individuals, we saw institutional accountability actually enforce, think about Kimmel suspension, the Texas state students expelled.
An enforcement that, as sources noted, the left had usually reserved for the right.
Which leads us, I think, to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider.
Okay.
If the fundamental goal of political violence like this is ultimately to silence up, we really have to ask ourselves, was the reaction to the assassination, the public celebration, media deflection, the subsequent sudden imposition of this accountability culture across the board, was that ultimately more damaging to free society and open discourse than the horrific physical act of violence? Today, we're tackling a really heavy set of material, focusing on a moment that truly shook the American political landscape.
That's right. We're digging into the assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk, and happening almost at the same time, that huge media controversy surrounding Jimmy.
Our mission here is to unpack the sources we've gathered, looking at the political and cultural fallout, the investigations, the reactions, just trying to make sense.
Exactly. Because, this isn't just about two isolated events. The source material really pushes us to look at the bigger picture, the intense political polarization, questions about free speech today, and the very real, sometimes tragic consequences of escalating rhetoric.
We want to extract the key insights from everything we've reviewed, what motivated the actions, how people reacted, and what the sources suggest are the potential going.
It's about understanding the temperature of the country, really, as reflected in these specific flash.
Okay, so let's start where we have to, with the incident itself. Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA, TP USA. He was young, only 31.
Yeah, and very prominent. He was shot and killed during a Q&A session at an event. This was at Utah Valley University, UVU.
Died right there, apparently. Left behind his wife, Erica, and devastated.
Absolutely. And the moments immediately after the shoot, sources describe just, pure chaos.
Right, and understanding that initial confusion is apparently key, because it shows how quickly things can go off track.
Exactly. Early on, police took a man named George Zinn into custody. But the detail here is pretty chilling.
What?
Zinn apparently yelled something like, "I shot him, now shoot me," during all the commotion.
You're kidding. Why?
The sources suggest it was a deliberate diversion to give the actual shooter a chance to, get away while everyone focused on it.
Wow. It's incredibly calculated. So Zinn wasn't the shooter.
No, police figured that out pretty quickly. But he was charged with obstruction of justice because of that stunt.
And there was something else too, right? A separate charge?
Yes. Possession of child sex abuse material, which just adds another really disturbing element to the whole situation surrounding.
And amidst all this chaos, you had political figures jumping in immediately?
Oh, absolutely. The
Yes.
pressure to control the narrative was intense. One thing our sources highlighted was that Donald Trump actually went on Fox News pretty early on.
And said what?
He announced that the suspect was in custody, but he was referring to Zinn, the wrong guy. It just shows how fast the political spin machine kicked in, even before the basic facts were nailed.
Okay, so the investigation gets back on track. How did they find the actual killer?
The trail eventually led them to a 22-year-old named Tyler Robinson. He didn't get caught right away, though. He actually turned himself in. But it was like 250 miles away, down in St. George, Utah.
How did that happen? Why did he turn himself in?
It seems a family member contacted the authorities. Apparently, Robinson had either confessed or strongly implied to them what he'd done, and they did the right thing.
Thank goodness for that. Now, the motive. This is crucial. What did the investigation find?
The sources are really clear on. Utah's governor, Spencer Cox, and the prosecutors involved, they all confirmed it was ideological.
How so?
Robinson came from a conservative family, but he himself had gone in a very different direction. The sources use phrases like radicalized by leftist ideology and describe him as being pro-gay and trans rights oriented.
So definitely not random violence. It was targeted.
Absolutely targeted, politically motivated, and the digital evidence. It just solidified that picture.
What did they find? Text messages?
Yeah, texts to his roommate. In them, Robinson allegedly confessed, saying something like he'd had enough of Kirk's hatred, and then this line, "Some hate can't be negotiated out."
Wow. That line can't be negotiated out. That really speaks volumes about the mindset, doesn't it? Like, viewing political opponents as fundamentally evil beyond discussion.
It taps right into that framework where disagreement isn't just disagreement. It's seen as oppression. And if it's oppression, then, well, maybe violence is the only answer left. That's the terrifying logic.
And there was more physical evidence, too, right? Something about the ammunition.
Yes, really specific symbolic stuff. They found unfired cartridges and spent shell casings that Robinson had actually inscribed messages on.
Inscribed? Like what?
Anti-fascist ideology. Things like lyrics from Bella Ciao, the Italian socialist anti-fascist song.
Yep, another one.
And phrases like, hey, fascist cat, just directly addressing his target with his ideological label.
That's incredibly deliberate, calling Kirk a fascist, right on the bullet.
And when the police asked him about it, Robinson apparently called these messages a big meme.
A meme. That's how he described it.
Yeah, which is, a really disturbing insight maybe into how some online radicalization works. It's like the violence gets detached from reality, framed as performance or some kind of dark in-group joke.
Almost trivializing the act itself.
Exactly. It sort of insulates the person from the sheer horror of political murder by wrapping it in this layer of internet culture irony.
So what charges is Robinson facing?
Aggravated murder, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering.
Yeah.
And the prosecutors have stated they're seeking the death penalty.
Okay. Now, this assassination, as horrific as it was, the sources point out it didn't happen in a vacuum. There's been other violence.
That's a crucial point the materials emphasize. This wasn't an isolated incident, even though it became the biggest flash.
What other examples do they?
Well, there was a Republican candidate in New Mexico convicted for planning shootings targeting Democrats.
Right, I remember hearing about that.
And the awful killing of Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband. The attacker reportedly had a list of Democratic targets.
Terrible.
Then there was a shooting at an ABC station in Sacramento, which we might touch on again later. And interestingly, near the site of the Kirk assassination, there was a separate incident.
What was that?
An attempted bombing of a Fox News van by two Pakistani jihadists, a father and son duo.
So you have violence motivated by different ideologies, targeting different political sides. It raises that question you mentioned.
Exactly. Why did the Kirk assassination specifically become the event that ignited this massive national firestorm about rhetoric and media bias?
What do the sources suggest is the answer?
It seems to come down to the reaction, particularly the immediate, very public, and, according to the sources, celebratory reaction from some parts of the political left. The crime was the spark, but the reaction was the explosion.
The way people responded to the victim himself.
Precisely. It shifted the whole conversation. It wasn't just how do we prevent this. It became, is it okay now to actually cheer when your political opponent is murdered? That question hung heavy in the air.
Let's unpack those reactions, starting with the conservative side. What was the immediate response there?
Mobilization, massive mobilization. The sources describe Charlie Kirk's memorial and funeral service. It was held at State Farm Stadium in Arizona.
A huge venue.
Huge. And the turnout was apparently just staggering. Our materials cite device tracking estimates over 277,000 devices nearby. The place reached capacity almost instantly.
That scale, it's hard to even picture. What did that signal?
It was a powerful statement. Any idea that Kirk's organization, TPUSA, which, the sources call a $95 million powerhouse with 3,500 chapters, might crumble without him, that idea just evaporated.
So it galvanized the movement instead of weakening it.
Absolutely. It became this huge rally, in a way, reaffirming their commitment, their numbers, their strength, right in the face of this tragedy.
And the tributes themselves, how did they frame Kirk's legacy?
There was a really strong emphasis on his faith. He was often referred to as a Christian martyr.
That framing is significant, isn't it?
Very. Calling him a martyr transforms his death threat. It's not just a political killing. It becomes a sacrifice for a cause that elevates the movement and intensifies the moral stakes of their political fight.
What else did the tributes focus?
His role in getting young people excited about conservative ideas, definitely. And also, interestingly, his anti-racism message. The sources note it focused less on skin color and more on individualism.
And politically, there were high-level gestures, too.
Oh, yes. Donald Trump vowed publicly to award Kirk the Presidential Medal of Freedom. That really cemented his place as an icon within the conservative movement.
And there was talk of a statue.
Right. The New College of Florida announced they were commissioning a statue of Kirk. specifically to honor free speech.
But the sources added a caveat to that, didn't they?
Immediately. It's fascinating. The focus instantly shifted from the honor to, practical security concern. The sources warned that protecting the statue from vandalism needed to be a top priority.
They mentioned past incidents.
Yes, specifically comparing it to the destruction of monuments like the George Floyd statue, warning that intense security and prosecution would be essential. So, honoring free speech immediately meant physically defending the symbol of that speech.
Amidst all this political framing, there was a very personal moment at the ceremony.
Yes, involving his widow, Erica Kirk. She actually spoke on stage and publicly forgave the assassin.
That must have been incredibly powerful.
The sources describe it as just that, a profound moment, really embodying Christian values of forgiveness, even in the face of, unimaginable loss and malice.
But that moment of grace, it didn't entirely set the tone for the political response, did it?
No, and this contrast is maybe one of the most revealing parts of the whole reaction, according to our source. Right after Erica Kirk's message of forgiveness, Donald Trump spoke.
And his message was different.
Starkly different. He explicitly said something like, Charlie didn't hate his opponents. He, Trump, did hate his opponent. And he emphasized seeking justice, telling the movement they needed to learn to fight.
So you had forgiveness and faith right alongside calls for aggression and fighting back.
Exactly. It perfectly captured this sort of split within the conservative response.
Yeah.
The appeal to higher moral ground versus the call for direct political combat. Two very different strategies being articulated back to back.
Okay, now we need to turn to the other side of the reaction, which, as you said, seemed to be the real catalyst for the broader fallout. What did the sources document there?
Yeah, this is difficult but necessary to cover. The sources detail a really widespread reaction of, frankly, celebration and mockery from significant parts of the left.
Mostly online, or more public figures, too.
Both. Definitely huge online on social media, but also from some prominent online influencers. People like Destiny and Hassan Piker were mentioned as publicly celebrating the killing.
Celebrating? How? What kind of things said?
It was often pretty callous. Phrases like "no one mourns the wicked," which is, a direct lift from the musical Wicked, used in this incredibly charged political context.
Right, applying it to a murder victim.
Yeah, calling it bozo. And in some cases, really awful stuff like wishing death on his wife and children. Just brutal dehumanization.
And did this stay online? Or did it spill into more official space?
It definitely spilled over. There was an incident in the House of Representatives that the sources focused on quite a bit.
What happened there?
A request was made for a moment of prayer for Charlie Kirk, and House Democrats objected.
Objected to a prayer?
Yes, and apparently it got quite heated. One Democrat, Jasmine Crockett, was singled out in the reports as actively screaming and screeching to basically shut down the proceedings.
Even though she later condemned political violence publicly.
Right. The sources use this incident to highlight what they see as a profound disconnect, condemning violence in principle, but then engaging in behavior seen as deeply disrespectful, almost celebrating the outcome, in a moment requiring basic solemnity. It prioritized political theater over, decency.
And were there consequences for people celebrating the murder? You mentioned accountability earlier.
Oh, yes. Swift and widespread consequence. The sources track numerous examples of people losing their jobs or facing disciplinary.
Who are we talking about?
A real range. A columnist for the Washington Post, Karen Attiah, was reportedly fired. She'd quoted some anti-Kirk slander, falsely attributed it to him in the context of his death.
So journalists. Who else?
City government employees. One was a Human Rights Commission VP, staffers at the NFL, even military personnel, writers for sports outlets. It was across various sectors.
What does that wave of firings suggest, according to the source material?
The sources argue it exposed a widespread belief, at least among some liberals or leftists, that supporting or celebrating political violence against certain targets was actually acceptable. The firings show that many institutions disagreed.
How did those facing consequences react?
Predictably, perhaps. Many claimed victimhood. The sources mention an influencer named Megan Fina who argued her life was being ruined.
And the argument was?
That conservatives were being hypocrites about free speech. That they were the ones being subjected to cancel culture for expressing their views.
But how do the sources counter that claim?
They draw a very sharp distinction.
Yeah.
Losing your job at a private company because you publicly celebrated someone's murder. That's not government censorship violating the First Amendment.
It's accountability within the private.
Exactly. It's companies enforcing their own ethical standard, deciding that employees who glorify assassination don't align with their values or public image. It's market consequences, not state act.
Okay, so happening right alongside all this fallout from the assassination was this huge secondary explosion involving Jimmy Kimmel. Let's get into that. What exactly did he say?
Right after the assassination, on his show, Kimmel made comments suggesting that Charlie Kirk's killer might actually be a pro-Trump Republican.
Wait, even though the early info pointed elsewhere?
Yes. He specifically said the MAGA gang was desperately trying to frame the killer as anything other than one of them. He basically floated a completely counterfactual theory, blaming the victim's own side.
In that incredibly tense moment, wow, how did ABC Disney react?
Swiftly. They indefinitely suspended Jimmy Kimmel Live, pulled it right off the air.
What was their official reason?
Pretty corporate speak, you know. They said it was to avoid further inflaming a tense situation at an emotional moment. They called his comments ill-timed and thus insensitive.
Did Kimmel apologize?
Apparently not. The sources say he refused, insisting his words were being deliberately twisted by Trump supporters. He essentially framed himself as the victim of a smear campaign.
So the suspension happens, and then what? A huge debate erupts, right?
Massive debate. And it centered on why he was suspended. Was it government censorship, or was it something else?
Let's take the government pressure argument first. What was the basis for that?
Well, Trump had publicly threatened ABC's broadcast license before. And then the FCC chair, Brendan Carr, made comments that sounded like a veiled threat.
What did Carr say?
Something to the effect that the network needed to find ways to change conduct, or there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like pressure. How did people react to that?
Democrats were furious. They called it authoritarian, a direct assault on the First Amendment. Some even suggested Trump should be impeached over it. The narrative became the government is silencing a critic.
But the sources suggest another perspective was maybe more dominant.
Yes, the material we reviewed leans heavily towards the idea that this was primarily a business decision driven by market forces and, importantly, affiliate pressure, not direct government censorship.
Okay, break that down. Market forces, what does that mean here?
Two key things. First, Kimmel's ratings weren't great. Sources say he was hemorrhaging viewers, down to only about 129,000 in the key demographic. He wasn't exactly a ratings juggernaut they couldn't afford to upset.
And the second thing, the affiliate.
This seems crucial. Local ABC affiliates the stations across the country that actually air the show. Many are owned by big companies like Sinclair and Nexstar, and they were reportedly outraged by Kimmel's comment.
Why does their outrage matter?
They control distribution. They can choose what to air. Sinclair, a major owner of local stations, actually demanded Kimmel apologize to the Kirk family.
They demanded an apology.
Yes. And some Sinclair stations even took the step of not airing Kimmel's show in the immediate aftermath, opting instead to broadcast a tribute to Charlie Kirk.
Wow, so they were essentially boycotting him from within the network structure.
Exactly. That's direct financial leverage. ABC was suddenly facing pressure not just from critics, but from essential business partners who deliver their content to viewers. It threatened their entire distribution model and revenue.
So the argument is Disney ABC acted to protect their bottom line and appease those powerful affiliates more than bowing to Trump or the FCC.
That's what the sources strongly suggest. The business rationale was arguably much more immediate and compelling than the threat of future FCC action.
This whole thing also brings up a really interesting point about free speech and broadcasting, right? It's not quite the same as just speaking your mind on.
Not at all. And this is a nuance many people miss. The First Amendment protects you from the government silencing, but broadcasters like ABC, they operate using public airwaves.
Under a license.
Exactly. A government-issued license that comes with conditions. They have an obligation to serve the public interest. And critically, they're not supposed to knowingly air false information that causes substantial public harm.
So the question wasn't just, can Kimmel say this? It was.
It was whether his comments spreading potentially inflammatory misinformation about an assassin's motive during a national crisis violated that existing public interest standard tied to ABC's license.
And the sources say many people were surprised by this standard.
Yeah, the sources mentioned liberals being shocked that this framework even applied. They might have viewed it purely through a First Amendment lens, forgetting the specific responsibilities that come with using public airwaves. The threat wasn't necessarily inventing a new rule, but enforcing an old one.
How did the celebrity world react to Kimmel's suspension?
Oh, they rallied hard for him. Over 400 celebrities signed letters. People like Pedro Pascal, Tatiana Maslany, Cynthia Nixon.
What was their argument?
They called the suspension fascist, urged people to cancel their Disney Plus subscription. Some reports said people did quit the service in droves, though it's hard to gauge the real impact.
But critics push back on that celebrity support.
Yeah, highlighting perceived hypocrisy. The sources specifically point to Pedro Pascal again.
How so?
Noting that he'd been largely silent when his former Mandalorian co-star, Gina Carano, faced intense backlash and firing for her political statement. Yet he was instantly vocal defending Kimmel.
So the criticism was that the defense wasn't about principle, but about protecting their own side.
That was the argument, yeah. That it was selective outrage based on political alignment, not a consistent defense of free speech for everyone.
What happened with Kimmel in the end?
He was reinstated pretty quickly, which naturally led critics to say Disney just caved to the pressure from their core far-left audience and the celebrities.
But did things go completely back to normal?
Not entirely. Remember those angry affiliates? Some local stations reportedly continued to refuse to air Kimmel's show even after he came back. That suggests the damage or the risk assessment lingered.
And there were real-world security.
Yes, tragically. An ABC station later experienced a shooting. The attacker apparently left a note warning about targeting Trump officials.
And the Sinclair?
The one that planned to air the Kirk tribute instead of Kimmel. They had to cancel that tribute broadcast due to specific threats of violence they received.
So even the controversy around the reaction to violence was sparking more threats.
It just shows how incredibly volatile the situation was. The rhetoric, even about a TV show suspension, was translating into tangible fear and intimidation almost immediately. The temperature was dangerously high.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit and talk about the deeper context the sources provide, the ideology, the rhetoric itself. A key theme seems to be the word fascist.
Absolutely central. The sources hammer this point. The term fascist is constantly misused, weaponized. Charlie Kirk, who advocated free speech, gets called a fascist by his killer.
How do the sources explain the actual meaning of fascist?
They connect it to a specific legal philosophy called legal positive. Basically, the idea that you only have rights the government grants, the state is supreme, the individual exists to serve the state.
Which is the opposite of American founding principles.
Exactly. The U.S. system is based on natural law, the idea that rights come from God or nature, and the government exists to protect those pre-existing rights. So calling someone like Kirk, who championed individual liberty, a fascist, it's a fundamental distortion.
So if it's not about actual political science, where does this misuse come from? What's the underlying ideology the sources identify?
They point towards a Marxist framework, this lens of seeing everything as a struggle between the oppressed and the oppressor.
How does that lead to calling Kirk a fascist?
In that framework, a prominent conservative voice like Kirk isn't just someone with different ideas. He's categorized as an agent of the oppressor class. His speech itself becomes an act of oppression.
And if you see someone as an oppressor,
then dialogue isn't the answer. The only solution, according to that ideology as described in the sources, is revolution. Resistance. Violence becomes not just an option, but potentially a moral duty to overthrow the perceived oppression.
It justifies violence as self-defense for the oppressed.
Precisely. And the irony, which the sources point out repeatedly, is that the people screaming fascist and threatening violence are often the ones using intimidation tactics, trying to silence opponents through force, which functionally resembles fascist method.
This connects directly to the whole debate about rhetoric turning up. Right?
Definitely. There's this common narrative you hear. The country's split 50-50. Both sides are equally extreme. Both sides are escalating things. Some sources acknowledge the argument that maybe the right is way more crazy, but the general framing is often one of mutual.
But the source material we looked at challenges that symmetry, doesn't it? With polling.
Yes, and this is really striking. Polls cited on our sources suggest a significant percentage of liberal voters, potentially up to 50%, disagree with the statement that political violence is never just.
Half. That seems incredibly high.
It is. And apparently, among younger, more politically engaged liberals, that number can be even higher. It suggests that for a large segment, violence is seen as a potential tool, depending on who the target is.
How does that data change?
Well, combined with that oppressor-oppressed ideology, it creates a rationale for action. The sources argue this mindset allows parts of the left to strategically avoid condemning violence when it comes from their own side, thinking of things like Antifa actions or riots during protests.
Why would they avoid condemnation? What's the strategy?
The argument presented is that if the targets are right-wing figures or businesses, not condemning the violence allows what some sources call a paramilitary force to operate, essentially enforcing political will through disruption and intimidation without facing unified opposition from the mainstream left.
And that, in turn, fuels the reaction from the right.
Exactly. It leads to conservatives fiercely rejecting calls for them to lower the temperature. Their perspective, as reflected in the sources, is often, we're not the ones starting this. We're being attacked, demonized, called fascists. We need to defend ourselves.
They feel like they have to learn to fight.
Right. It creates this dangerous feedback loop. Perceived aggression justifies a defensive, sometimes aggressive response, which then confirms the initial perception of aggression, and it just spirals.
This intense climate also seems to be leading to more calls for using government power in these political fights.
Yes, that's the final piece of context the sources delve into. We see it with federal agencies like the FBI and DOJ.
How so?
Well, the FBI's handling of the Kirk investigation drew criticism. The director at the time, Kash Patel, apparently made some premature or conflicting statements about the shooter, which made the agency look less than competent, maybe even politicized, during a really sensitive manhunt. That damages trust.
And there were calls to use federal laws in new ways.
Yeah, Trump publicly called for using RICO charges against left-wing groups, specifically mentioning George Soros' organizations.
RICO, like the law used against the mafia.
Exactly. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Trump blamed these groups for essentially fostering the climate that led to Kirk's death.
Is there evidence for that kind of direct link?
The sources are clear. Currently, no evidence has been presented showing criminal wrongdoing by those specific groups in relation to the assassin. But the willingness to deploy such a powerful legal weapon designed for organized crime against ideological opponents that signals a major escalation in political warfare tactics.
We also saw examples of direct federal intervention in local law enforcement.
Right. The sources bring up Trump's previous use of federal agents and the National Guard in Washington, D.C. to address crime. It resulted in a large number of arrests, 2,200 according to the sources, and there was a reported short-term drop in violent crime there.
And the significance of mentioning that now.
It's presented as a model. Trump apparently promised to replicate that kind of federal intervention in other cities like Memphis and Chicago, perceived as having high crime rates and failing local leadership.
So that points towards a potential shift, a greater willingness to federalize policing in certain areas.
It certainly suggests that, which would be a huge shift in the balance of power between federal and state or local authorities, raising all sorts of constitutional questions. But it reflects this climate of seeking strong, even federal-level solutions to problems when local politics seem intractable or fail. #TagC. Conclusion and final thought.
So wrapping this all up, this deep dive has really laid bare incredibly raw, frankly frightening dynamics in American politics. We've traced the assassination, the investigation, the immediate explosive reactions.
Yeah, the collision between free speech absolutism, corporate calculations, media responsibility, and this growing justification, even celebration of political violence. It's a potent mix.
The sources paint a picture of a dangerous cycle. Disagreement gets framed not just as wrong, but as fundamentally oppressive, as a violation of right.
And that framing makes violence seem like legitimate resistance. It bypasses the need for persuasion or debate entirely.
It leaves us with a really difficult question, doesn't it? The sources touch on this idea of goodness versus nice.
Right. Can a society maintain goodness, a commitment to core principles, including civil discourse, even with people you vehemently disagree with, when the environment is so polarized that just being nice or superficially pleasant feels impossible or even like complicity?
We've walked through the details from the source, the shock of the assassination, the way some celebrated it, and then the swift real-world consequences, people losing jobs, charges, political landscape shift.
The accountability for celebrating murder, at least in the private sector, was remarkably fast and widespread, according to our... Which leads us to the final thought we want to leave you, the listener.
Given how quickly those consequences hit, relying largely on private public pressure, what else?
Beyond just enforcing criminal laws against violence itself, what deeper long-term social norms need to be established or maybe reestablished and reinforced to truly prevent the normalization of political assassination? How do we do that in a country that fiercely values both free speech, even extreme speech, and aspires to some level of civil discourse?
What norms can actually hold environment? That's something for all of us about. We're tackling something pretty unprecedented in recent American politics, and honestly, the source material itself is incredibly
tough one.
We're doing an in-depth analysis of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the conservative activist, founder of Turning Point USA. He was killed September 10th, 2020.
Right, during that event at Utah Valley University.
And the aftermath. Well, it was like a shockwave across the country. You had this intense grief, political anger, particularly on the right.
But then, almost unbelievably, you also had sources documenting widespread celebration of his death in, certain cultural spheres.
Exactly. And our sources really mirror that divide. We've got news transcripts, chilling details from the investigation, the alleged killer's own words.
And then hours of these raw, very powerful memorial speech, high-profile figures, political, religious.
Plus clips covering the media reaction, the cultural arguments. It
really was. So our goal here, it's tricky, but we need to synthesize this. We have to try and establish the known facts about the killing itself, cutting through some of the noise. Then look closely at those immediate cultural responses, the grief, the rage, the celebration, which were often pretty brutal.
And then maybe the core of it distills what his colleagues, his family, presented as the key themes of his life, legacy.
Right. Because what's fascinating and what the sources really hammer home is how quickly this whole thing was framed. It wasn't just politics.
No.
It became this national conversation about faith, about the real possibility of political violence, and this growing fear about free speech protections eroding.
Okay, so let's start by breaking down the incident itself. What do the sources tell us about the actual attack? It sounds like it was cold, calculated.
Absolutely. Highly planned seems to be the consensus in the initial report. It happened September 10th, 2025, TPUSA event, Utah Valley University.
And there's that detail from the investigation. The alleged shooter, Tyler Robinson, apparently called UVU a stupid venue for the event.
Yeah, that detail came out. And the method itself, it speaks volumes about the preparation. We're talking a 200-yard shot.
Long range.
With a specific rifle, a Mauser 30-06 power. And sources described the shot chillingly as, well, relatively easy if you had the right gear.
Why easy?
because Kirk was a static target. He was sitting on stage, not moving much, predictable.
Right. Easier for a sniper. And the suspect, Tyler Robinson, they identified him quickly, but the really disturbing part seems to be his own messages right after.
Oh, definitely. The digital trail is key here. He apparently texted his partner or roommate pretty much moments after the shot.
And the instruction was just, Dark, drop what you're doing, look under my keyboard.
And the roommate finds this note, physical note.
Which police later released, right? Photos and transcripts.
Exactly. And the note said, clear as day, I had the opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk, and I'm going to take it.
Wow. So written confirmation of intent right there. Maybe written just before or even during.
It implies premeditation, absolutely.
Yeah. And Robinson's text after the shooting. His demeanor is just unnerving.
Completely. The partner texts back. Something like, what? You're joking, right? Understandable shock.
Of course.
But Robinson, calm, focused on logistics, getting away. He texts, I am still okay, my love, but then says he's stuck nearby in Orem. Had to get the rifle. He actually confessed in the text he'd hoped to keep this secret till I died of old age.
So it suggests this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing, even if the final plan was quick.
Right. The sources say the actual plan came together in a bit over a week, but the desire might have been longer term. His big concern right then was getting Grandpa's rifle.
From where he'd hidden it.
Yeah, in a bush where he apparently changed clothes. And he specifically told the roommate, don't talk to Lon.
Okay, so that brings us straight to motive. The sources seem very specific here.
Extremely specific. They explicitly link Robinson's actions to leftist ideology, pro-trans, pro-gay views.
And involvement with the trans furry.
Yes. That specific phrase appears in reports summarizing the investigation's findings on his background and online activity, alongside general online forum. Robinson himself, in messages, accused Kirk of spreading hate.
So the sources that are framing this are connecting his actions directly to these specific online subcultures.
Exactly. The implication drawn by highlighting these niche communities, rather than just saying extremist, was deliberate. It was to frame the assassination as sort of the physical endpoint of the ideological battle Kirk was fighting against the cultural left.
The argument being that extreme rhetoric aimed at those groups could lead to this kind of violence.
That's the argument presented in those sources, yeah.
Now, this next part, it got a lot of attention. The physical aftermath. The Man of Steel detail.
Right, this came from a surgeon involved.
And
it is medically unusual, apparently. The bullet, that high-velocity .30-06 round, absolutely should have gone through Kirk's body. That's the quote from the surgeon. Given the power of the caliber.
It would normally exit.
And likely hit people behind him. Staff, guests. They were right there. Could have been multiple casualties.
But it didn't exit.
No, the bullet stopped. They recovered it inside Kirk's body.
How did they explain that?
The surgeon attributed it, the fact no one else was killed, to Kirk's impressive health, specifically the density of his bone structure.
His bone density stopped the...
That was the surgeon's explanation reported in the source, described as an absolute miracle it was contained.
And you can see how that detail would be seized upon.
Oh, immediately. Especially by those focusing on the religious aspect. It wasn't just a medical anomaly.
It was seen as, what, divine intervention?
Proof of divine providence, some said. Or a physical symbol of his strength. It instantly fed into that martyrdom narrative, his body literally acting as a shield.
Okay, so the investigation into Robin, it's described as exhausting. Kash Patel leading the FBI side.
Right. Patel announced they were rigorously looking into it. The focus was clearly on radicalization. Was he pushed by others?
Like online networks, Discord was mentioned.
Yeah, Discord groups specifically. Was he part of something bigger or a lone wolf radicalized online? That seemed to be the key question for the FBI.
And because of this intense scrutiny, they had to deal with conspiracy theories right away.
Oh, yeah, they popped up instantly. Like the one about a plane turning off its transponder near the shooting site.
The FBI addressed
directly. They refuted it. Said the data gap was just a common issue with flight tracking in rural areas. Nothing suspicious.
And the other one about Dr. Frank Turk, Kirk's mentor.
That was bizarre. Turk was at the event, wearing a white hat, FaceTiming his family moments before the shot.
And people claimed
that his gestures, holding the phone, were some kind of secret signal to the shooter.
Serious?
Yeah. Turk had to publicly deny it, explain he was just talking to his son and daughter-in-law. It shows you the level of suspicion, the atmosphere around this.
It really does. Now, back to Robinson's profile. Beyond the confession, what did sources say about his demeanor?
This was striking. Hours after the assassination, observers reported him as appearing fairly calm, almost strangely so.
Calm?
Well, the analysis in some sources suggested this calmness was consistent with a certain psychological profile. Maybe a psychopath was the term used. Someone who feels totally justified.
No remorse because they think they did the right thing.
That's the idea present. We also know from older body cam footage that surfaced, he had an awkward cadence, maybe social anxiety issues.
But calm under pressure.
Calm during conflict in that prior footage, yes. And then there was the other disturbing finding.
The material on his phone.
Allegedly, yes.
Yeah.
Child sexual abuse material, which investigators were reportedly using to build a profile of overall instability and danger.
So, putting it all together, the official narrative seems strong. Ideologically motivated killer acted alone after online rap.
That's definitely the direction the initial reports and official statement.
But you mentioned skepticism. Where is that coming from?
Persists, yeah. Among certain group, online commentators, even some figures cited in alternative media source, they see the conclusion as too neat, too fast.
What are they skeptical about specifically?
Transparency, mainly, and the focus. They want more evidence released, particularly about the rifle.
The rifle.
Yeah, the claim that he disassembled it on the roof, then reassembled it later. Critics felt that wasn't fully substantiated with technical proof in the public releases.
Okay.
But more broadly, they question the focus of the investigation. They ask why the FBI isn't looking harder at Kirk's own state from before he died.
Statements about being threatened.
Yes, specifically, threats he claimed he received from a billionaire pro-Israel person.
Why would he be threatened by...
According to those sources pushing this angle, Kirk had apparently shifted his stance recently, become less staunchly pro-Israel. And people close to him claimed this shift had already resulted in credible threat from wealthy figures who felt, well, betrayed by his new position.
So the critics are saying the FBI should investigate that potential radicalizing factor, or even connect not just the leftist ideologue.
Exactly. They argue that even if Robinson pulled the trigger, maybe he wasn't the only one involved, or maybe he was pushed by actors the current investigation is ignoring. The speed is their main complaint, a rush to judgment.
But with the confession tech, the rifle recovered, the online history...
Yeah.
Isn't the lone wolf explanation pretty solid? What evidence are they actually missing?
They want the full chain of custody on the evidence, forensic details about the rifle handling, things like that. And they want all documented threats investigated with equal rigor, not just the ones that fit a particular political narrative.
Okay, let's shift gears now. From the crime scene, the investigation, to the memorial service. The atmosphere described in the sources is just completely different.
Night and day. It instantly went from forensics to, well, faith. The service itself, held in Glendale, Arizona. It wasn't just described as a funeral.
No, the term used was old-time revival.
Right, like a spiritual gathering. Reports mentioned millions watching online, huge crowds there in person, not just mournful, but victorious. That word came up a lot.
A victorious moment. That's striking.
It is, and the political establishment reacted incredibly quickly. They saw this wasn't just another death.
The House and Senate resolution?
Exact. Passed almost immediately. Naming October 14th, Kirk's birthday, a national day of remembrance.
That's fast-tracking someone into essentially a national symbol, formal immortalization.
That's precisely the word used. Stephen Miller, former Trump advisor, he really captured that theme at the memorial.
What did he say?
His line was widely quoted. "You thought you could kill Charlie Kirk. You have made him immortal."
Wow.
And he framed it as a battle cry, vowing to defeat the forces of wickedness and evil. Miller drew this really sharp line. "We are the ones who build. The left destroys. The right builds."
So not just mourning, but mobilization, framing the assassination as a catalyst.
Absolutely. A catalyst for victory, for asserting moral superiority.
And connecting this back, the big theme running through all the speeches was spiritual revival, martyr.
Yes, centrally. You had figures like VP, J.D. Vance, Tucker Carlson, Dr. Frank Turk, all speaking very openly about their Christian faith.
This Vance's comment got a lot of play.
It did. He admitted, quite frankly, he'd talked more about Jesus in the last 2 weeks than his entire public life. Kirk himself was remembered constantly for his faith, his devotion to Christ, his belief that life's whole point was to know Jesus and to make him known.
Fighting a spiritual war for the country's soul. That phrase.
Repeated. And Tucker Carlson, he focused a lot on Kirk's discipline, his relentless drive. He compared him to the Apostle Paul, saying he never stopped.
And Kirk apparently wanted to be remembered for specific things.
Courage and faith. Those were the two qualities sources said he hoped would define his legacy. His wife, Erica, confirmed this sense of readiness.
She said he was ready to die.
Yes, that while it was too soon, he had no regrets, had happily carried his cross all the way to the end. The word martyr wasn't used lightly.
No, it seemed intentional, pervasive across.
Definitely. Framed in the true Christian tradition, a tyrant's power ends at death, but a martyr's power, as one speaker put it, has just begun.
Another major theme at the memorial was family, right? And his personal...
Hugely important. Remember, Kirk started TPUSA when he was just 18, but his vision, according to the speakers, was heavily focused on reviving the American family.
And his own discipline was held up at the biohack.
Yeah, and that wasn't just like a quirky lifestyle detail. It was framed as crucial.
How so? Crucial for what?
For the mission. His extreme discipline, the biohacking, optimizing his body and mind, being religious about sleep, the super strict diet.
The grilled chicken, hot sauce, salmon diet?
Right. That wasn't presented as just personal wellness.
Yeah.
The argument was this physical rigor was part of his spiritual and intellectual readiness. It kept him in fighting shape for the political battle.
A model for the movement, essentially.
Exactly. This level of control and output was presented as what's necessary for modern political warfare.
And his marriage was part of that family focus.
Central to it, Erica Kirk talked about their little secret for a strong marriage.
The love notes.
Every Saturday, he'd write her a note asking, "Please let me know how I can better serve you as a husband." She said their marriage was his greatest cause.
That's quite personal for a public memorial.
It underscored the theme. And that commitment, that partnership, is why the next announcement wasn't entirely surprising, though still significant.
Erica Kirk taking over TPUSA.
Yes, announced as the new CEO. And she didn't just promise continuity. She vowed to make the organization 10 times greater.
And continue the campus events, the debates.
Absolutely. The very things that defined his work and, tragically, put him in danger. She was emphatic. His passion was my passion, and now his mission is my mission.
Wow, that's a powerful statement. But maybe the most arresting moment from the sources was about forgiveness.
Erica Kirk's statement, publicly saying, "I forgive him," meaning the killer.
And invoking Christ on the cross, "Father, forgive them.
For they know not what they do." Yes, in that atmosphere of intense anger and calls for action, it was a profound moment.
Politically strategic, too, perhaps. Setting a moral high ground.
You could certainly interpret it that way. It provided an immediate, stark contrast to the hate attributed to the killer, but it also raised that complex theological question.
Personal forgiveness versus state justice.
Right, because despite her forgiveness, the Utah prosecutor is seeking the death penalty.
And the speakers tackled that apparent contradiction.
Head on. They argue that Christian forgiveness, the personal act, doesn't negate the state's duty. The civil authority carrying the sword, as they put it, for justice.
To punish crime, protect the innocent.
Exactly. It's necessary for order. And Erica herself was clear on this distinction.
She didn't want his blood on her hands.
That was her phrasing regarding the death penalty decision. She said she wouldn't offer an opinion on it, respecting that separation between her personal spiritual stance and the state's legal process. That nuance was key to how the movement seemed to process.
Okay, so the cultural reaction, it sounds like it was just immediate and pretty vicious. It really threw the whole free speech debate into sharp relief.
Instant. And the Jimmy Kimmel situation became the poster child for that whole firestorm.
Right. He got sidelined, suspended by Disney ABC Next Star.
Because he went on air days after the killer's leftist motives were known and suggested the shooter was MAGA.
Which was demonstrably false by that point.
Completely false. Critics jumped on it, calling it an egregious and malicious lie, accusing him of using the tragedy for political points, ignoring facts.
But then the counter-argument came, didn't it? People defending Kimmel.
Yeah, some on the left portrayed him as a free speech martyr, punished for daring to make jokes about a conservative.
But the core of the dispute, according to most sources covering it, wasn't about the joke itself.
No. The argument from critics, and reportedly from the network, was that he was suspended for the lie, the verifiable falsehood spread on a major platform during a national crisis.
So a media integrity issue, not strictly a free speech issue. That was the distinction
That was the crucial distinction being argued, yes.
And this Kimmel thing became a symbol of what critics called media recklessness. There were other examples cited.
Absolutely. Like that ABC News reporter, Matt Gupp. He apparently called the text exchange between the killer and his partner touching.
The confession texts.
Yeah. That word choice was widely condemned as revolting, seen as another sign of media bias or just profound lack of judgment regarding a conservative figure's murder.
And this sense of political toxicity, it wasn't just in the mainstream media. The gaming industry got pulled in.
That was another flashpoint. Sources highlighted numerous game developers from big studios like Blizzard, Square Enix, Sucker Punch, who went online.
And did what?
Expressed glee or zero sympathy about Kirk's death, called him a hate-filled bigot, things like that, publicly celebrating.
Wow. From people working at major companies.
Right, which led to this huge backlash, people calling it evidence of an evil disease, moral rot within the industry. It was seen as this alarming normalization of celebrating political violence.
Strengthening the conservative argument that the left had lost.
That was definitely how it was framed by conservative commentators. It fueled their sense of unity against perceived moral decay.
But even there, you had a defense based on free speech principles.
Yeah. Tim Sweeney, the CEO of Epic Games, he weighed in. He defended a professor's right to, quote, diss someone about Kirk's death.
Even if the comments were offensive.
His argument was constitutional. A public university especially has to protect the right to vigorously criticize, even if the criticism is ugly or ill-timed. He separated the right to speak from the content of the speech.
Which perfectly tees up the bigger government debate that followed.
Exactly, because then you had the Trump Attorney General make that initial comment
about needing to clamp down on hate speech.
Yeah, which immediately set off alarm bells across the conservative world. It sounded like the government wanting to legislate speech, define what's acceptable.
A direct threat to the First Amendment there.
Absolutely. Creating a category of hate speech subject to federal prosecution, that's a non-starter for them.
And that comment got walked back pretty quickly.
Very quickly. The pushback was intense.
Yeah.
It really showed the deep, absolute opposition on the right to any government limits on speech, which ironically was a core part of Kirk's own message.
So the political response at the memorial, the speeches by Trump, Van, they reflected this high-stakes feeling.
Definitely. They weren't just eulogies. They were criticized by some for being too political, but they framed the assassination in existential terms.
Defeating radical left maniacs, that kind of list.
Yes. Arguing it wasn't just a crime against a person, but an attack on our entire nation. An assault on our most sacred liberties. The goal, they argued, was to silence the conservative message through violence.
And they linked that violence to rhetoric from the left.
Directly. The sources mentioned specific left-wing streamers like Destiny, Stephen Bonnell, and Hassan Piker being called out for allegedly encouraging violence against conservatives in the past. Commentators demanded they be treated as terrorists and fully deplatformed, removed from all public platforms.
So pushing for consequences for speech deemed insightful.
Yes, a clear demand for action against specific individuals seen as promoting harm.
But here's the twist. The major takeaway reported from the immediate aftermath. Did the attempt to silence Kirk actually work?
Dramatically the opposite, according to the source. The TPUSA, it continued right away.
No pause.
No pause. And that first event after the assassination at the University of Minnesota, historically not friendly territory for TPUSA, it sold out completely.
Sold.
Packed. This was immediately interpreted as proof positive. The attempt to silence him had backfired massively. It woke people up, galvanized the base.
So instead of shutting down the movement, the assassination actually fueled it.
That was the narrative, backed by the immediate surge in engagement and attendance.
And we should probably end this section by coming back to Kirk himself. His own philosophy seems so at odds with the violence.
It really does. That last private message he sent the day he was killed to a staffer.
I'm not here to fight them. I want to know them and love them.
Yeah, that sentiment, wanting engagement, dialogue, even with opponents, even in hostile places that became the defining challenge for his movement going forward. How do you live that out after the hashtag tag outro? So when you boil it all down from this deep dive, you see this really stark contrast, this difficult dichotomy.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have the assassination itself, calculated, brutal, driven by this specific ideology, targeting Kirk for what the killer saw as hate.
Cold and political.
Right. But then the response, especially from his immediate circle of the movement, it pivots completely. It becomes about deep spiritual commitment, that intense personal discipline we talked about.
And that really profound act of forgiveness from Erica Kirk, setting a completely different tone.
Exactly. A moral high ground established almost.
And that contradiction. Kirk's own approach, seeking dialogue, wanting to know and love his opponents, even putting himself at risk to do it.
Versus the sheer violence that met him.
It seemed to immediately shift the focus for his supporters, didn't it? The tragedy galvanized.
It absolutely seemed to, pushing them, as the sources suggest, towards maybe a deeper conversation internally about faith, about that kind of rigorous discipline, finding purpose beyond just politics.
You saw that with figures like J.D. Vance, Tucker Carlson, speaking much more openly about Christ, about courage, right after it happened.
Yes, so the attempt to silence him, based on all these accounts, it seems to have done the exact opposite. It amplified his message within his movement.
Which leaves us, and you the listener, with a really difficult question, doesn't it? Stemming from his legacy.
I think so. Kirk's whole approach, praised by his allies, was about courage, discipline, running towards the ideological fight, going onto those hostile campuses.
Taking the risk.
Embracing the risk. But the consequence ultimately was extreme violence, martyrdom.
So the question is, what now? For a movement facing that reality.
That's the moral path. Or even the strategic. Do you follow Kirk's example literally? Keep running towards the fight, embrace that risk, knowing the potential cost.
Yeah. Or do you conclude the cost is just too high? That open dialogue in such a polarized climate dangerous and maybe necessitates a retreat, protecting lives by sticking to safer spaces.
It's a fundamental choice about engagement versus security, directly raised by his life.
A profound choice indeed.
Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, so today we're tackling something pretty heavy, very consequential. We're diving into the immediate aftermath of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, a moment that really sent shock.
It absolutely did. And the sources we synthesized for this, well, they cover the whole spectrum. You've got profound spiritual responses sitting right next to intensely political accusations, media narratives, even conspiracy.
Right. So our mission today isn't to pick a side or validate any single view. It's really to lay out these incredibly varied perspectives for you, our listener, to give you that comprehensive, informed picture of the impact based on what these different sources were saying.
Exactly, from the spiritual side to the, let's say, hyper-political battle.
So let's dive right in, because the fight over the story, over the narrative, it started immediately. Our sources are pretty clear. The killer was identified early, a radical leftist, motivated by specific left-wing LGBT ideology that wasn't really in dispute based on the evidence he left.
No, that part seemed quite clear from his own documentation. But what's fascinating, or maybe predictable, is how fast the political framing tried to muddy those waters. You look at someone like Jimmy Kimmel, his initial comment, he jumps out suggesting the shooter might be part of the MAGA gang.
Implying it was maybe internal conservative violence.
Precisely. Or that conservatives pointing to the killer's actual ideology were just trying to score political points. It was an immediate attempt to shift the focus.
Okay, so you have this documented motivation on one side, and then this almost instantaneous counter-narrative popping up from prominent media figures trying to paint it as, well, something else entirely. MAGA infighting, maybe?
Right. That initial framing, especially from Kimmel, really set the stage for a lot of the media fallout that we saw.
And that battle over how to frame it, it really came down to how to classify the killer, didn't it?
It did. Was this person, as Kimmel later tried to suggest, just a deeply disturbed individual? Sort of random apolitical pathology.
Or was, as Kirk's allies were insisting, someone who was specifically radicalized by an ideology, a political and social ideology you could actually name.
And that distinction is just crucial, isn't it? Because one implies, like you said, random tragedy, maybe mental health issues alone. The other suggests a dangerous ideology at play.
And interestingly, the language from Kirk's harshest critic actually seemed to lean towards the radicalization idea, but they flipped it to blame Kirk himself. We've got sources detailing the kind of words used by people like Ilhan Omar, other progressives. They weren't just condemning his rhetoric. They were basically saying his death was, in a way, justified by his rhetoric.
Yeah, the term stochastic terrorist, that's a heavy term.
Can you just quickly unpack that for listeners who might not?
Sure. Stochastic terrorism, the idea is that someone's public speech is so inflammatory, so consistently dehumanizing towards a group that it doesn't directly order violence, but it makes violence. It incites sort of random actors to lash out.
So the argument was that Kirk's own words created the conditions for his murder.
That was the essence of it, calling him a transphobe, a reprehensible human being. The claim was his rhetoric enacted his political agenda by preying upon weak mind. Therefore, well, the implication dark that this was the logical outcome.
It's a really striking moral inversion, isn't it? Blaming the victim based on the documented opposing ideology of the attacker.
It is. And Ilhan Omar, her role seems significant in amplifying this particular narrative.
What did she do specifically?
Well, the sources say she retweeted videos right after his death, videos that were incredibly defamatory, terms like Christofash. And some of this content basically argued that Kirk had, in effect, created his own killer because he had argued you can't negotiate with hate. It was a complete
shifting the focus away from the killer's stated motives entirely.
Exactly. Which brings us back to the Jimmy Kimmel and the whole accountability.
Right, because his initial comments linking the shooter to MAGA turned out to be factually wrong. But the way he handled his return was interesting.
Interesting is one word for it. His non-apology, as some sources called it. He came back saying his comments were maybe ill-timed or unclear. And he insisted he never meant to blame any specific group. But, the record shows he pretty explicitly named the MAGA gang.
So he sidestepped the factual error, framed it more as a misunderstanding or bad time.
That's how it came across in the analysis we reviewed. Less about, I was wrong, and more about, maybe I wasn't clear, which, is a classic PR move.
And that whole episode then sparked the next debate. The one about the FCC?
Yes. Donald Trump, among others, claimed Kimmel was briefly off the air because of pressure, which immediately led to cries of government censorship.
Okay, but what did the sources suggest actually happened behind the scenes? Was it really the government stepping in?
Well, the closer look suggests it was more about market dynamics and corporate decisions. We're talking big private station groups like Nexstar and Sinclair.
And their executives, they have their own political leanings or business interests, right?
Exactly. Sinclair's chairman is a known Republican donor. Nexstar, which is huge, apparently had an FCC merger pending around that time.
Okay. So the argument is that these private companies may be facing backlash, maybe getting heat from figures like FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr, who did criticize Kimmel publicly.
Right.
They decided pulling the content was just better for business, or maybe politically expedient, possibly hoping for smoother sailing with the FCC down the line.
That's the alternative perspective presented. Not direct government censorship ordering him off air, but private corporations making a calculated move in response to pressure public, political, and potentially regulatory concern.
Which leads directly into this whole cancel culture double standard debate that the sources kept bringing up.
It's a core critique. The observation was that many on the left who were loudly decrying government overreach and censorship when Kimmel faced consequences
had previously been okay with or even championed canceling figures on the right.
That's the argument. And furthermore, these sources pointed out the apparent irony. This outcry about government interference seemed to ignore documented instances, or at least allegations, of the Biden administration potentially pressuring social media companies to censor content, something the mainstream media, according to these critics, largely downplayed.
So the perception was a double standard and outrage depending on who was being canceled or facing pressure.
Precisely. And it's noted how effectively Kimmel pivoted. He went from making a comment that caused outrage to framing himself as a victim of government overreach, a defender of free speech.
And did that work for him?
Some reports cited in the sources suggested his audience actually increased dramatically, maybe even 20 because of the controversy. It shows how adeptly controversy can be spun into a benefit in the current.
Okay, so if that first part was steeped in political maneuvering and, frankly, cynicism, this next part shifts dramatically. We're moving into the spiritual response, which was just as powerful, if not more.
Absolutely. And the central moment, the one that just resonated everywhere, was Erica Kirk's act of forgiveness.
It was stunning, standing there publicly forgiving her husband's killer.
And not just forgiving, but stating that this young man, the killer, was exactly the kind of person Charlie wanted to reach, wanted to save, wanted to bring closer to God.
The impact of that statement was immense, wasn't it? The sources really capture how people reacted.
Viscerally. It cut across political lines. You had prominent figures, even staunch conservative, saying openly, I admire that, but I couldn't do it.
Donald Trump was quoted saying something like, I'm not forgiving my opponent.
Right. And others admitting, their flesh fought against the very idea. It forced a kind of personal reckoning for a lot of people watching.
And that powerful personal reaction really brings us to a vital theological point that the sources spent a lot of time unpacking: the difference between personal forgiveness and the role of the state in delivering justice.
Yes. This is crucial. We tend to mash these together in popular discourse, but the Christian framework, as laid out in these theological discussions, makes a very sharp distinction.
So personal forgiveness, where does that come from?
Primarily Romans 12 in the New Testament. It's about interpersonal grace, turning the other cheek, letting go of bitterness, overcoming evil with good. It's an internal heart posture, really, meant to free the victim from hate and the cycle of revenge.
Okay, so that's the personal internal side. But then there's the government's role.
That's Romans 13. It speaks of the governing authorities, the magistrate, as being instituted by God. And its God-given role is specifically to execute justice. And importantly, punish.
So forgiving someone in your heart doesn't mean the government shouldn't punish them for their crime.
Exactly. According to this theological view, personal forgiveness, the release of bitterness, is commanded for the individual Christian. But it doesn't, and actually cannot, override the government's separate, God-ordained duty to administer objective justice, which includes punishment for wrong.
One of the sources used an analogy from Lonesome Dove to explain this, right? That seemed quite effective.
It really was. It involves Jake, a character who's a friend of the main protagonists, Gus and Call, the retired rangers. But Jake falls in with a bad crowd, becomes an accomplice to horse thieves and murderers.
And the rangers, his friends, have to deal with them.
They do. Justice demands he be punished for his crimes, and they hang him. That fulfills the requirement of Romans 13, the state, or in this case, the closest thing to lawful authority, punishes the evil.
But they don't just leave it at that.
No. Simultaneously, they show personal grace, that Romans 12 element. They offer him kindness in his final moment. And then, crucially, they perform a distinctly Christian act. They give him a proper burial. They cut his body down while leaving the other, less sympathetic outlaws.
So justice is served, but personal kindness and forgiveness are still present.
That's the core lesson drawn from the analogy. Punishing the crime, even with the ultimate penalty, and practicing personal forgiveness are not mutually. One is the state's job, the other is the heart. Satisfy the law while releasing.
Beyond the forgiveness aspect, this whole event was framed by many as igniting something bigger, a kind of spiritual awakening. The sources talk about two key terms here: revival and renewal.
Yes, and it's helpful to distinguish them. Revival, as generally understood in these contexts, is about bringing something dead. Think genuine conversions were agnostic, atheist, spiritually indifferent, coming to faith for the first time.
And renewal.
Renewal is more about renovating something that's already. It's about refreshing, re-energizing, might have become lukewarm, cynical, or just drift.
And was there actual evidence cited for a revival happening?
Well, the scale of the response was one indicator. The memorial service for viewership numbers cited were astronomical, 100 million plus the in-person attendance.
But numbers don't always mean genuine change. Were there specific stories?
Yes, and those were perhaps more compelling. The sources highlighted personal testimonies of radical immediate conversion.
Like the story of the former New Age follower.
Exactly. Someone deeply into practices like moon circles, tarot cards, crystals, all of that. She described feeling empty, encountering Kirk's message, which was often described as blunt, truth-focused, and having this sudden conversion experience, and the immediate result. She reportedly threw all her tarot cards, witchcraft books, everything straight into the trash. It wasn't gradual. It was portrayed as a decisive break.
That's quite dramatic. And it wasn't just ordinary people, was it? There was talk of prominent figures speaking more openly about faith.
That was also striking. You had people like Don Jr., Tucker Carlson speaking very personally, sometimes seemingly off the cuff, about their faith in Jesus Christ, which, is pretty unusual in mainstream political discourse these days.
J.D. Vance was quoted as well, wasn't he?
Yeah. Yes, saying something like, "I've talked more about my faith in Jesus in the last 2 weeks than in the last 10 years of public life." It suggested this event, this tragedy, somehow cracked open a space for public spiritual discussion that maybe wasn't there before.
So for people who might have experienced that kind of conversion or are maybe just exploring faith now because of all this, perhaps listening right now, the sources also offered some practical guidance, a sort of roadmap.
Yes, a very practical 4-point list emerged from these discussions, aimed at grounding that new or renewed faith.
Okay, what's the first step?
First, be grounded in Scripture. Simple enough, but crucial. Get into the Bible. The specific starting points often recommended were the Gospel of John or the Book of Ephesians, which Erica Kirk herself mentioned publicly.
Makes sense. What's number 2?
Second, commit to a strong local church. And the advice here was look for sound doctrine, clear teaching of the Bible. It shouldn't be shallow, just cute story. It needs substance, real theological depth, mirroring, in a way, the emphasis on truth that characterized Kirk.
Right. Avoid shallowness. Okay,
Third, and this one seemed aimed more at existing belief, reject the cynical spirit. This was framed as a warning against becoming like the older brother in the prodigal son parable.
the one who resented the father celebrating the lost son's return.
Exact. The point was, established Christians need to welcome these new converts with genuine warmth and love, not suspicion or questions about whether their conversion is real or will last. Tenderness, not sin.
That's powerful. The last.
Fourth, embrace discipleship. New believers need guidance, mentors. This means people already established in their faith need to step up, be willing to answer basic questions, recognizing that someone new might not even know simple Bible. It requires patience, opening your heart, getting involved in the sometimes messy process of helping someone grow.
All right, let's pivot back now to the political landscape, because alongside the spiritual dimension, there was an immediate effort to analyze and often attack Charlie Kirk's specific political stances and legacy. Let's start with his final international trip.
Yes, that trip to South Korea and Japan seemed quite significant in his thing, especially regarding globalism and immigration.
What was his main message on that? How was he defining globalism in that context?
He framed globalism as this force actively working to erase what he called a nation's distinct people, culture, identity, place borders, and its patois. He saw globalism as intentionally trying to break down national sovereignty and uniqueness by eroding.
And he used some pretty direct, even provocative examples to illustrate this, didn't he?
Right.
Especially regarding immigration.
He did. While speaking in Japan, for example, he brought up the historical argument that mass immigration contributed to the decline of the British Empire. Then he made it very concrete for his Japanese audience with a hypothetical. If Japan, known for its homogeneity, were to import, say, 40 million Pakistanis, his point was, Japan's not Japan.
And the argument was this wasn't about race or xenophobia per se.
His framing, according to the sources, was that it was about cultural preservation, that unchecked large-scale demographic shifts inevitably change the fundamental identity character of a nation.
There was also an anecdote from that trip about something he observed in Seoul.
Yes, apparently he was struck by the lack of children, seeing empty playgrounds. For him, this observation reportedly reinforced his focus on the importance of restoring the family unit and boosting birth rate, both in the U.S. and global, as essential for cultural survival.
He also made a point of visiting a statue of General MacArthur.
In Incheon, yes, MacArthur was one of his personal heroes, symbolizing, for him, strong leadership that defends national identity and border. There was also a mention that a planned visit to the specific DMZ spot where Trump met Kim Jong-un got canceled by the UN for reasons that weren't clear.
Okay, shifting back to domestic policy, a major flashpoint used to critique his legacy was his view on the Civil Rights Act of 1964. What was the core of that argument?
The argument detailed in the sources is that the act, originally designed to combat specific legal segregation against Black Americans, has been stretched far beyond its initial scope.
How so? What's the key criticism of his current application?
It centers on the shift from addressing disparate impact to policing disparate effect.
Okay, can you break down that legal jargon for us? What's the real-world difference?
Sure. Disparate impact generally refers to a policy that seems neutral on its face, but unintentionally harms a protect. Think of, say, a firefighter height requirement. It's not explicitly discriminatory, but it might disproportionately exclude women or certain ethnic groups.
Right. So what's disparate effect?
Disparate effect, as critiqued in these sources, is a much broader interpretation. It suggests that if any group, say Black American, isn't achieving the exact same numerical outcomes as another group, like white Americans, in areas like college admissions or job hiring, then the Civil Rights Act can be invoked to claim discrimination, even if many other factors, poverty, family structure, individual choices might be contributing to that.
So it moves from policing discriminatory actions to policing unequal outcomes.
That's the critique. That it has created, in the words of one source, a massive anti-racist DEI army focused on enforcing numerical proportionality, which they argue was never the original goal of the 1994 law.
Are there specific examples cited at how this is being?
Yes. Things like challenging voter ID law. The argument isn't necessarily that the law intends to discriminate, but that if it has a disparate effect on minority voting rights, it can be struck down under this expanded interpretation of the Civil Rights Act.
And the main concern from Kirk's perspective, or his allies, was applying this to an entirely new area.
Exactly. The prime example brought up was using the Civil Rights Act, specifically Title IX, which deals with education, to argue about transgender issues, like compelling schools to allow biological males identifying as female to compete in women's sports. The critics argued this essentially equates that issue with the original moral fight against Jim Crow segregation, which they see as a fundamental distortion of the Act's purpose and text.
Let's move to pure economic. Post-mortem, Kirk faced accusations of pushing tax cuts mainly for the rich, while wanting to cut programs for the poor. How did his camp defend his economic platform?
The defense highlighted several proposals aimed squarely at the working and middle class. Things like eliminating federal income tax on tip.
Okay.
Also, eliminating federal income tax on overtime pay and eliminating federal income tax on Social Security benefit. These were presented as direct financial relief for average Americans.
But what about the charge that he still favored the wealthy? How did they counter that?
They pointed specifically to his support for closing the carried interest loophole.
Right. Can you quickly explain what that is again?
Sure. It's a tax provision that allows managers of investment funds like private equity or hedge funds to treat a large chunk of their earning, their share of the investment profit, as capital gains, which are taxed at a much lower rate than ordinary.
So closing it would mean those high earners pay more tax.
Significantly more, yes. His allies argued that proposing to close this loophole showed he wasn't just about cutting taxes, but also about making the wealthiest pay their share, specifically targeting a loophole benefiting the
What about social programs like Medicare and Medicaid? Was he aiming to cut those?
The sources stress a distinction here. The claim was that Medicare, the health program primarily for seniors, was not being target cuts.
Okay.
However, Medicaid, the program for lower-income individuals and families, was seen as needing significant reform. The argument wasn't for elimination, but for tackling what was described as widespread fraud and abuse within reform, not abolition.
And then there was the big one, abolishing the Department of Education. That sounds drastic. What was the reasoning in the proposed plan?
The reasoning was based on perceived failure, declining educational outcomes, despite massive spending, and what was described as incredible administrative bloat.
Were there numbers cited?
Yes, some pretty startling ones. Like, out of roughly 11 million people working in government education jobs, supposedly 7 million are administrators, not teachers in the class. That ratio was presented as evidence of huge inefficiency.
Wow. So if you abolish a department, what happens to things like school lunches or student loan?
The plan wasn't to just end those functions. It was about decentralization. School lunch programs, for instance, could be moved to the Department of Agriculture. Student loan administration could go to the Treasury Department.
So break it up and send the pieces elsewhere.
Essentially, yes. The core belief underpinning this was that getting rid of the federal department would cut down on bureaucracy, save money, and return control over education back to the state and local levels, where advocates argue it belongs.
Finally, on the policy front, let's hit those culture war issues. He was accused of downplaying slavery because he criticized Juneteenth. What was the actual objection, according to his defenders?
Their defense was clear. The objection wasn't to celebrating the end of slavery itself. It was specifically about the official name and frame, Juneteenth National Independence.
Why was that specific framing an issue for him?
He argued, according to these sources, that establishing a second, separate, independent Independence Day, specifically for Black Americans, undermined the idea of a single, unified national identity centered around July 4th. He saw it as potentially divisive, creating two distinct national narratives rather than celebrating emancipation as part of a shared America.
Okay, and the criticism for calling George Floyd a scumbag. How is that defended?
The defense rested on pointing to objective facts from Floyd's criminal history. Specifically, they often cited a 2007 armed robbery conviction where Floyd reportedly held a gun to a pregnant woman's stomach.
So the argument was about sticking to facts versus a sanitized narrative.
Yes. The defense claimed Kirk was pushing back against what he saw as a media narrative that often omitted or downplayed these aspects of Floyd's past in order to portray him solely as a martyr figure. It was framed as a defense of focusing on uncomfortable.
Okay, as we near the end, we have to address something that was swirling around the whole tragedy, the conspiracy theory, both external ones and, perhaps more damagingly, internal conflicts fueled.
Absolutely. These narratives definitely clouded the picture and seemed designed, in some cases, to distract or divide.
Let's start with the external stuff. There was a pretty wild rumor about Benjamin Netanyahu offering Kirk a huge sum of money.
Yes, the $150 million bribe rumor. That circulated quite widely online. The sources we looked at traced it back often to journalists or outlets having Iran-backed media.
And was there any truth to it?
Kirk's inner circle, his close allies, stated unequivocally that it was false. They really emphasized that Turning Point USA, the organization he founded, had a strict ironclad policy against accepting any foreign money. Only American fund. They apparently had even turned down attempted foreign donations in the past.
So a clear denial. But the sources did note his relationship with Israel was somewhat complex, which maybe provided fertile ground for rumors.
It was nuanced, yes. He was consistently pro-Israel and supportive of Jewish people, but he also maintained he should have the freedom to criticize specific Israeli government policies, like their PR handling of the war or certain military actions, without automatically being branded anti-Semitic. He felt that label was sometimes used too quickly to shut down legitimate policy critique.
Okay, that clarifies the external rumor. But then you have the internal conflict, specifically involving Candace Owen. This got pretty ugly, didn't it?
It really did. Owens, who had been an ally, was accused by others on the right of essentially hijacking the tragedy, not to mourn Kirk, but to push her own, often extreme conspiracy theories, and even implying some kind of nefarious plot behind his death.
What was she implying?
Sources reported she made comments suggesting Kirk was finally coming closer to the truth of who's really behind it all, just before he was killed, with the strong implication being some kind of Jewish involvement or...
Wow. And this fit a pattern. What were some of the other theories attributed to her that raised alarm?
The list cited in our sources is, well, it's quite something. Claims like Jews invented dinosaurs to deceive Christians about the Bible's timeline.
Seriously?
Yes. And that space travel and astronauts were also fabricated for similar reasons. Mm-hmm. She apparently suggested Jewish figures were controlling Donald Trump's mind. And then, very publicly, there was the claim that Brigitte Macron, the wife of the French president, is secretly a man.
Isn't she being sued over that one?
She is reportedly facing a defamation lawsuit in France for that claim.
So the concern among other conservatives was that this kind of stuff wasn't just fringe theorizing, it was actively harmful.
Exactly. The perception, as reflected in the sources, was that Owens was poking holes in the boat from the inside, creating internal division, promoting outlandish ideas, and distracting from what they saw as the real fight against external political opponents. It was seen as incredibly damaging to conservative unity.
Okay, let's shift from the who to the how. There were also conspiracy theories about the logistics of the assassination itself, right? The mechanics of it.
Yes, those gained a lot of traction online. Really outlandish stuff, like someone emerging from a hidden tunnel like a Ninja Turtle to carry out the shooting, or theories about the bullet's trajectory being physically impossible.
How did law enforcement perspectives, cited in our sources, address these, particularly around the handling of the body and forensics?
They pushed back hard, especially on any suggestion that proper procedures weren't followed. The key point made by experts was that a homicide investigation mandates a full autopsy. It's not optional.
And that's done by the medical examiner, not the police on scene.
Correct. The ME performs the autopsy to gather crucial forensic evidence, bullet path, angle, weapon specific. Skipping that step would be almost unthinkable, they argue, because it would completely undermine the prosecution's case against the killer.
So any confusing initial reports, like dispatch audio, didn't mean an autopsy was skipped.
No, that confusion was explained as likely being about the on-scene documentation by responding officers, not an indication that the mandatory detailed forensic examination by the medical examiner didn't happen as required by law.
Finally, there were critiques about security. Not necessarily Kirk's personal detail, but the event and university security.
Right. While Kirk's own security team was often described as an elite force, fiercely loyal and willing to take a bullet. The criticism focused on the broader security setup at the university venue.
Which should have been done differently, according to the experts cited.
The argument from law enforcement sources was that for high-profile, potentially contentious events on campuses today, the standard needs to be higher. They specifically mentioned things like needing a competent drone program for overhead surveillance and ensuring there were eyes on every rooftop overlooking the events. Basically, a failure of perimeter security was highlighted as a key vulnerability there.
Just one last detail on the personal side. The sources mentioned something about the nature of his death itself.
Yes, a small point, but one that offered some comfort to his supporters. The forensic information apparently indicated his death was virtually heinous. One moment, he was engaged in debate, doing what he loved, and the next moment, according to this account, he would have essentially blinked and seen his savior. No prolonged suffering, no fear. #tag.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it's clear the aftermath of this assassination unfolded across at least 3 distinct, really complex battlegrounds.
Absolutely. First, you had that immediate, intense fight over the political narrative, who was the killer, what motivated him, and the subsequent media fallout and accountability debate.
Then second, that powerful spiritual dimension. Erica Kirk's forgiveness setting off waves, leading to deep theological discussions about personal grace versus the government's duty for justice, and sparking talk of revival.
And third, the ongoing battle over Kirk's own political legacy, defending his specific policy stances on immigration, economic, the Civil Rights Act, culture war issues, all while fighting off both external and internal conspiracy theories and division.
It really acted as a lightning rod, didn't it?
Yeah.
Exposing not just the deep political and ideological divides in the country, especially around political violence.
Yes, and the sources did document specific instances of some on the left appearing to celebrate or justify the killing.
But it also exposed significant fault lines and, frankly, vulnerabilities within the conservative movement itself.
And maybe a final thought to leave our listeners with, something that connects that spiritual response back to the everyday conflicts we all face, political or otherwise. It's a quote that came up repeatedly in the source.
What's that?
There's no neutral ground in all of the universe.
No neutral ground. What's the implication there?
Well, it challenges you, the listener, to think about how you engage with the world. If you accept the premise drawn from that spiritual perspective, that the ultimate victory, the ultimate truth, is already secured,
then maybe the way you fight changes.
Exactly. The question becomes, are you desperately fighting for victory as if everything depends on your immediate success? Or are you operating differently, fighting from victory with the confidence that the larger battle is already won?
That's a really provocative thought. How does that posture, fighting from victory rather than for it, change how you approach conflict, whether it's in politics, your faith journey, or just personal challenge?
How does that perspective shift your mindset, you author, as you process